What do we know of the world invisible? What do we know of the mystery of those sleep visions called dreams, those voices and scenes that come to us all in the night? No more than the austere ant working under our feet all day long knows of us. Thus begins Visions of Roses, one of 18 short stories from Tales of Terror, Ida Chittum's most popular book among the 13 she authored in as many years, and the one that established her reputation as a writer with bold, authentic voice that carried echoes of the hills and woodlands where she learned the art of storytelling. Tales of Terror, published by Rand McNally in 1975, marked a distinct shift in her repertoire. Her transformation from housewife to published author was made possible by a talent for crafting light-hearted stories for children. By contrast, Tales of Terror took a left turn into a lonesome dirt road into the dark heart of hill country. It was a world she knew well. Unlike her stories for small children, which are pure fictional fun, Tales of Terror draws upon real human drama, including murder and madness. In her first collection of short stories, she moved confidently from humorous yarns to starkly realistic fiction with elements of horror that could be read and relished by adults. The same can be said of her second collection of frightful tales set in the Ozarks, The Thing Without a Name, in 1981, whose title story unleashes a ravenous monster blown down to earth from a dying star. Writers who gravitate to horror do so for many reasons. In Chittum's case, she was inspired by folkloric legends of monsters like the Whistler. Possessed of supernatural intelligence, the Whistler lay out of sight in the piney woods, luring innocents to their dooms by whistling low, provocative tunes. There are also more than a hint of the monstrous in her stories about ordinary people who do terrible things. Tackling dark and disturbing subject matter took Chittum's writing to a new level. Each story testifies to the handiwork of a skillful narrator in control of all elements of the short story, from deft character sketches and suspenseful plots to settings steeped in atmosphere. In Tales of Terror, Chittum flexed her literary muscles, moving confidently between genres, marrying realistic fiction with horror, mystery, and the supernatural. All of her stories are grounded in realism. Some are so tightly focused on their characters that they resemble documentaries shot with a handheld camera. But there's always a surprise in store as the narrative spins off into the strange or terrifying. Like other writers, much of Chittum's work is biographical in nature. The child Ida, renamed as Ada, Marianne, or Jenny, is a character in several of her stories. Indeed, the Dovers are fictional stand-ins for her own family, the Hoovers. Ida, the author, felt free to draw upon what she saw firsthand, including harrowing experiences coming of age in a world as violent and brutal as it was wild and beautiful. Revenge-inspired murders were not unheard of in the Ozarks of her youth. In the house the Dovers didn't move into, a brother and sister, Long and Jenny, are terrorized by two rampaging specters bent on revenge. The story opens with a bucolic scene of a family cooking over an open fire outside an abandoned farmhouse known as the Kelly Place. In a fictional flip of a switch, calm gives way to nightmarish violence as the older children, left on their own to sleep out of doors, look on in horror as two crazed shadowmen pursue a third terrified specter and kill him with a knife that they used to cut off his head, holding their bloody trophy aloft in triumph. When the father returns the next morning, he listens solemnly to Ginny's tale of terror and decides to pack up and move on. Camping out on a nearby creek, he chats with two locals who tell him that the Kelly place has stood empty since Big Matt Kelly was murdered there, and not in an ordinary way. "They cut his head off," Papa said. "You already heard the story." No, the father replies. My boy Long and my girl Jenny seen the fight. Chittum was more than a keen observer of her life and times. She was also a writer ahead of her time, possessed of a sensibility that marked her as forward-thinking. She gave voice to the voiceless, especially wild animals. Her stories resonate with a sensitivity born of a heartfelt insistence on the sentience of all wild creatures, including insects. In The Twisting Wind, the reader is introduced to Joffrey, an outcast boy who roams the forest, sleeping beneath trees and communing with rabbits, birds, and ants, whom he deems to be wiser than people having lived on the earth so much longer than us. And Uncle Ned Kunkle, possums with long memories take revenge by feasting on the corpse of their persecutor, Uncle Ned, who dined daily on the flesh of young possums. The elemental force of nature have an outsized role to play as well. In the pit, a primal presence lurking in the depths of an abandoned mining shaft calls out to tormented souls contemplating suicide. Similarly, the twisting wind in the story by the same name is a quasi-conscious, untamed force that can be summoned to make evil men vanish without a trace. Her stories often read like urgent calls to both respect and fear the natural world. Like Geoffrey, Ida the child studied the world, seen and unseen. Unseen not because it wasn't there, but because most people didn't take time to search it out. Chittum's editors at Rand McNally were at first hesitant to publish a collection of stories both terrifying and tender, moving and unsettling accounts of human frailty and strength, of kindness and cruelty, but they saw the stark beauty in the collection and showed their confidence in the book with the inclusion of stunning, full-page black and white illustrations and a painterly cover that depicts faceless hill people standing among tombstones in a surrealistic graveyard. Over time, Tales of Terror went out of print. The few copies that remained became hard to find collector's items, although many libraries kept it on their shelves. Thanks to the goodwill of the folks at Rand McNally, I was able to secure the copyright and bring Tales of Terror back from the dead. It is my singular hope that this reissue will introduce new generations to these haunting tales and filmic glimpses of a bygone place and time, as seen through the eyes of a natural-born storyteller named Ida May. Signed, Samme Chittum, Ph.D. Acknowledgements. The 5th anniversary reissue of Tales of Terror would not have been possible without the unstinting support of my husband Brad Torrum and my brother James H. Chittum. My father, the late James R. Chittum, deserves special mention for his devotion to my mother and her career as working writer and public speaker. I am especially grateful to David Chambers of Rand McNally, who helped me realize my dream of bringing Tales of Terror back to life. I also want to thank Michael W. Phillips of From Beyond Press, who encouraged me to reissue Tales of Terror. Lastly, I remain grateful to the people of Findlay, Illinois, who knew and loved my mother, Ida Chittum, as a kind and caring neighbor who was always there to lend a hand or care for an injured bird with a broken wing. By the author. These stories of the hills are taken from my childhood in the Ozark Mountains, those scenic hills in the south-central part of the United States that are now, for the most part, national forests and wildlife conservation areas. There every visitor was a storyteller, a source of mystery. Having no books, I read the folks who came calling of a Sunday afternoon. The hills were fertile grounds for listeners. These are accounts of a passing way of life, stories of a people who lived out their lives, never seeing the outside world or expecting to, any more than one sees into heaven before dying. Storytellers lived in the hills. They believed that the signs of coming good and ill were to be read on all sides by those who paused and waited and looked with care. Their beliefs were as strong and simple as a pan of yellow cornbread steaming hot from the oven, and as complex and brooding as the Milky Way. They were people who accepted as natural that which others called unnatural, people who nodded respectfully at the sight of ghosts, having had personal acquaintance with the spirits and the like. In a sense, these stories are mysteries, accounts to wonder on and ponder over. They are tales that need telling before they are lost or forgotten. The old folks knew, and would tell anyone with courage enough to listen, tales of a beast of darkness called the Whistler, said to possess supernatural intelligence. It laid outside in the piney woods, luring the innocents to their dooms by whistling low, provocative tunes. Also told were herring tales of frightful aquatic monsters washed up from deep underground rivers in the wake of flash floods, left behind to bedevil the night. Folks said there were creatures in these hills found nowhere else, creatures once seen, not easily forgotten. Creatures who appeared by night and vanished by day. Who knows, folks said with slitted eyes, what creeps out of those hollow, pitted, gloomy hills to scramble over the countryside. At ease, showing consideration towards these misty beings, the hill folk accepted and believed in them. They believe that the dead return from that land beyond the grave whenever there's a need, or when they've a mind to. Maybe they were right. Being from the hills, I would say there's a good chance. The hills held their own private charm and magic. Real hill tales and secrets were exchanged only among ourselves, only in guarded tones. They were not shared with outsiders. Outsiders wouldn't understand, couldn't understand. Outsiders were looked upon in silence, with suspicion, answered only with nods of the head, closed faces, and blank stares, shut out of our hills and our ways. In the remote area where we lived, far from neighbors, there were deep caves one dared not venture into. Steep-sided pits reached to fearful depths in the earth, and the wise did not linger near. When we heard sounds beyond our door by night, it could mean many things, none of them pleasant. We were a family of 10 hungry children, and I was 7th down the line. Our table staples were brush rabbit, fat young groundhog, and, like the Kunkles in this book, possum with sweet potatoes and beans, baked and boiled. Just as the Dovers picked rocks and crops of woods and fields, so our family lived, moving often, waking winter mornings with snow sifting through the cracks in the walls, whitening the faded quilts. In those days I, like Courtland Wethers, longed to go outside and see what those people in the city did all day without trees to climb and rivers to fish and swim in. Now that I've done the things that city people do, I feel more and more the call of those hills, and my thoughts return to the timber where I spent so many happy hours. Ida Chittum. The house the Dovers didn't move into. The children of the Dover family were numerous and hardy. Up to the night at the house they didn't move into, they were fearless too. True, they stepped high to keep from tramping on copperheads on the way to the choppy St. Francis River, where they rode logs downstream bareback. But this was just good sense, not fear. All the Dovers were lean and agile. They kept in trim by picking cotton, beans, corn, and potato bugs off the potato vine. The Dovers made a living by picking crops in season. There was no season, though, on rock picking. That went on all year long. Endless tons from the endless steep hillside farms Papa moved on to and off. No sooner was one layer of rocks gathered than another layer shot to the surface. Any time Papa set the hoe down on a weed, and the hoe went ping, the Dovers once again set to the back-breaking job of rock picking. And there wasn't much joy in that. You couldn't pop a rock into your mouth to ease the hours like you could picking sweet strawberries. The devil, had he wished to sit, would have had a slippery time of it on the busy hands of the Dover children. Even so, the Dovers were a happy lot. Papa moved the family 2, 3 times a year, but the great fun of moving never lost its newness for the Dovers. Every old house was a new country to explore, and every house was searched from cellar to attic. Treasures had been found by the Dovers, bags of rainbow-colored pheasant feathers. Jenny had made a church hat of them, stringed harps without strings, Indian relics stashed away in attics and forgotten, long strands of dead folks' hair laid across rafters. Mamma burned these decently. Once, unforgettably, there'd been a red Prince Albert tobacco tin filled not with tobacco, but with dimes. Strange as it may seem, all the old houses the Dovers moved into had names. The Hill Place, the Bringman Farm, the Price House. Named they were for former owners now buried in tiny graveyards in their own backyards and pastures. The house the Dovers were moving into today was known as the Kelly Place. No one had lived in that old house for a long, long time, or wanted to. What the Dovers didn't know was that the last to live there had died there, not pleasantly. The Kelly place was marked, forlorn, bleak, and barren, with no flowers in the yard, only gravel and ash and brush everywhere. "Don't worry," Mamma would always say about such a house. "A dozen happy children will liven the place up." When the Dovers spied their new house, they leaped from Papa's wagon, like grasshoppers from a loosened sack, scattering in all directions, all ages and sparkly eyed. Long, the oldest boy, gentle-faced and easy-going, set to the unloading of the wagon. The homemade bench Papa had built 6 children ago came first. Next, a battered table and chairs. Pots, pans, quilts, and blankets were stacked on top of the table. The quilts, if read, would have told a humble story of the family's clothing. The squares were made of everything from Papa's worn-out jackets to baby scraps of flannel, all straight from Mama's sewing basket. The last items out of the moving wagon were 3 bulky straw mattresses. Jenny, the oldest Dover girl, had curly fair hair and bright blue eyes. She was in charge of Martha, the second youngest Dover, who had the habit of eating pebbles same as other babies eat raisins. Jenny set Martha in the exact center of a spread-out faded quilt. Long and Jenny waved to Papa as he drove off. Pop had to return to the last place where Mama and the brand-new baby, James Harry Dover, were waiting. Mama would bring the breakable dishes and the laying hens. Papa waved to Jenny and Long. The younger children would be safe. Jenny and Long were dependable. It was the habit of the Dovers to sleep out of doors the first few nights when moving into a different house. This gave Mama and Jenny and Brown Lye Soap time to clean. So now Jenny went to find a place for the cooking fire and sleeping. Long, taking the axe, went to get up wood. Every child had his chores to do. The Dover children were used to being on their own. Neighbors were miles away, and not to be bothered in any case, Mama said. Bertha and Edith spread out, aired and shook the blankets. They plumped the 3 straw mattresses. If the older ones felt crowded sharing the mattresses, they took a blanket and slept on the grass. If by any chance you woke up at night and, staring up in the shower of stars that was the night sky, felt lonesome, you could roll a little closer to the group. You just knew you were safe with all those warm Dovers around you. Lily and Bobby sorted the dried beans for supper. They held beans in their palms a few at a time, searching out pebbles. Homegrown beans always have a few pebbles. If you've ever had the experience of setting your tooth down on one, you'll never forget the feeling. Grace and Helen washed the beans under the pump with sound effects of squealing and laughing as water splashed. Jenny checked Martha's round mouth for small stones by turning her index finger around in the child's mouth. She felt her underclothes for wetness. Martha wasn't trained all the way. She was only a baby, too, having been followed by James Harry Dover on very short notice. That done, Jenny began the important task of cooking supper. She laid the wood chips and touched a match to them. Filling the big black iron pot half full of water, she balanced it on 2 big rocks over the growing flames. Jenny handled this special pot with care. "This pot belonged to your grandmother," Mamma would say. Later, after Papa had died and times were even harder than they were now, Mama would say, "I wish we had all the beans and apple dumplings ever cooked in that pot. We would never be hungry again." All the empty-bellied Dover children would nod with visions of overflowing apple dumplings before their eyes. Jenny mixed biscuits. They would be fried in the big heavy iron skillet that matched the pot. She was just stirring the beans with a long-handled wooden spoon when she got the first inkling that something was not quite right. Lily and Bobby ran plowing through the grass and weeds fast as their legs would carry them, crying. They were howling. Their chubby hands shook. They clung to each other and then to Jenny like clench bugs. "Shadows!" Bobby yelled. "After us!" Lily whimpered, smoothing her words into Jenny's cotton dress. Their tongues tangled and twisted, trying to explain the unexplainable. Jenny plumped the two of them on the nearest mattress and put warm fried biscuits in their hands. "There," she said, "you'll feel better." By now a solid darkness lay beyond the fire, and dovers gathered like homing birds. They perched round the steaming bean pot, their eager faces flushing in the red glow of the fire. Jenny served up supper, beans and fried biscuits. Mama and Papa would not arrive from the last place until morning. A bucket of beans was set aside for them. Bedtime. Did the Dovers need to be told? Never. They washed quickly and touched the mattresses were sound asleep. It was some hours later. Jenny was startled awake. An icy breeze was blowing that had no place in summer night. There came sounds, not usual night sounds. Heavy feet pounded the earth. A fierce struggle sounded somewhere out of sight. "Long! Long!" Jenny called her brother. Waking, Long shivered. He pulled a scanty blanket over his shoulders. "There's something out there," Jenny whispered. Long was on his feet. He heard the sounds too and threw some wood on the fire. If there was trouble, he wanted to see. That's when the racing shadows came into sight. A deeper black they were within the night's blackness. 3 shadows of running men. The first man was huge. He burst out of the night, running head down, gasping for breath, his mouth open. After him raced 2 other man-shaped shadows without faces. The 2 pursued the first, bent on murder. Their roared threats and vile curses filled the night air. Their breath was the breath of hate, and the stench of it came from them. The first man tore round the house, running for his life. The second 2 followed, running for his death. The 3 reappeared. The first shadow stumbled. The 2 were upon him. They kicked his sides and head, hammered his body with their fists. Long, rousing from shock, without knowing what he was really doing, jumped up. He dove into the shadows to help the downed man. "I can't let him be murdered before our eyes," he gasped. Come back," Jenny cried, leaping over his brother. "They're not real." But the 2 vicious shadows turned from the man on the ground. They fell upon Long with shrieks of rage. The boy threw up his hands to protect his face. Jenny grabbed hold of Long. She dragged him over the dried grass and ashes into the saving light of the fire. The awful battle of the shadows raged on. The shape of a hand holding a knife flashed up and then down, time and again, into the shadows of the jerking man on the ground. The cries of the dying man became groans of anguish. His hands lifted, raking the night air with a dreadful pawing. His legs twitched in a last death agony. Then the murderers knelt over the body and began the most gruesome task of all, the sawing off of the head. With a cry of triumph, one of the shadows held the severed head high. He let it swing back and forth, sprinkling blood. Then, with one last whoop, he flung the whopping head upon the ground, and the 2 raced off. The rolling head, set of strong yellow teeth, grinned towards the mattresses in ghastly fashion. The shaggy hair lifted in the quickening breeze. An unearthly light, not from the Dover's fire, surrounded the head, giving it the look of a ghoulish jack-o'-lantern. The first rays of the rising sun ended the nightmare for Jenny and Long. Papa and Mama came, and the brother and sister told them what they had seen. Papa loaded up the family. That night they camped by a friendly creek. A fisherman there told them about the Kelly place. Years ago, 3 men had fought there in a violent argument over a still. Big Matt Kelly had been murdered, not in an ordinary way. Papa unwound a fishing line of his own. He baited the hook. "They cut his head off," Papa said. "You already heard the story." Papa shook his head and looked away over the water. "No," he said, "my boy Long and my girl Jenny seen the fight." Vision of Roses. What do we know of the world invisible? What do we know of the mystery of those sleep visions called dreams, those voices and scenes that come to us all in night? No more than the austere ant working under our feet all day long knows of us. It was such a dream vision came to John Young at a time when he needed it most. John and Mercy were married for some time when a much longed for child was born to them. A boy it was. They named him John for his papa. The boy Johnny was past 2 that evening. He trailed Mercy as she was herding the geese toward the shed. Mercy was rightly proud of the fine flock of geese she had raised up that spring. Geese mean feathered pillows of the best kind to have and to give. A roast goose is fit food for the table on a Thanksgiving day. Mercy was extra careful to bring the geese in each night. This twilight little Johnny ran among the flighty geese, scattering them in all directions. "Go home, Johnny, you bad boy!" Mercy shouted out. Johnny went away, but not home. He doddered right into the duck pond off behind the house. Mercy found him later, floating there. Mercy would not speak afterwards. She kept the house neat and tidy as it had always been. Meals were served well cooked, but in silence. The beaten biscuits were still fresh from the oven to the platter and soaked in new butter. John's clothes were washed and ironed as before, his one white shirt starched and laid out stiff and sparkling for Sundays. Mercy herself was like the walking dead, a woman who still lived but had lost her soul. She remained deaf to any remark addressed to her, looking through John and beyond him. Shock, some said. Time heals all sorrows, they said, and she'll get over it. Folks made these pronouncements after little Johnny's burial. Mercy didn't, couldn't. The small house, which had been so cheerful and bright with child and woman's chatter, was quiet as a tomb. More cheerful was the little new grave upon the slope. Wild birds sang there all day long, and flowers bloomed. Near a year passed with nary a word from Mercy's lips. Matters came to such a pass, John called on to the circuit rider when he preached the first Sunday of the month at the schoolhouse church. The preacher came, a lean, wind-tanned, intense man, looking more like a weathered hickory root than anything else. He knelt to pray with Mercy in her own house. He prayed aloud that together they might cast out this affliction of silence. He waved his long arms. He thundered over Mercy, imploring her to wrestle for speech before the throne of the Almighty. "Let this woman speak!" the preacher roared, calling upon heaven. In a deep, far-reaching voice he summed up Mercy's misdeeds, adding John's failings as well. "Mercy Young is treading the narrow path to destruction with his silence," he shouted out. "O Lord, show this wordless woman the evil of her ways, so that, as I warn her, she may flee from the wrath to come." The preacher rose to his feet. The look of satisfaction on his face changed to one of consternation when he saw Mercy rise, leave the house, and go out to stand by the grave of her child. The silence was unbroken. No word was spoken. John Young was a patient man. All the neighbors said so. His boy was asleep upon the hill. There's nothing a man could do about that. Mothers, too, had to bow to the will of the Lord. Most could, with time. Except Mercy. She couldn't. John knew he must find a way to help her. Every night he must sleep light so that Mercy didn't wander off into the timber. She'd done that twice. He found her in the morning all damp, lying in a hollow with the gathering birds called an alarm over her. One evening there was a more than usual strained look in his honest gray eyes as he sat at the clean, well-spread table. Mercy, neat and silent as always, sat across from him. John talked to himself, for there was no answer, over the heavy china plate of fried ham, milk gravy, and hot bread. "Come back to me, Mercy," he implored, anguished. "Where are you?" he asked, searching for some response in those eyes that had no depth. At last he crashed his work-hardened fist down upon the table and rose, trembling in fear he might strike Mercy, if only to force a sound from her lips. He stalked out of the house then to walk the hills. The next morning John did not go to the field. He would have something more for the two of them than food in their mouths. He rounded up 2 acorn-fattened pigs, took them to market, and pocketed the cash. With his pig money he took Mercy to the doctor in Springfield. Everyone back in the hills waited to see what would come of this drastic action. John, keeping Mercy close at his side, had a talk with the doctor. He explained about the death of their son, told the doctor he was sorely troubled with Mercy's long, unnatural silence. The doctor examined Mercy in every way, and announced afterward there was nothing to be done. "Mr. Young," he said, shifting papers about on his broad, shining desk, "you can put your wife in the state asylum. They'll do for her there." He explained how Mercy had the notion fastened in her mind that speech had caused her child's death. She might go the rest of her life without uttering a word. John came away from Springfield after buying Mercy ribbons and bright cloth. These might have been gray shreds for all she noticed. He was full of pain as a man can be. Pain and hurt and stubbornness too. He would never give up trying to bring Mercy back from wherever her mind had fled. He was still furious that anyone would suggest putting his loved one away, to be neglected perhaps even forgotten. Then, too, he had overheard one doctor say to another he had never heard tell of a man trying to cure his wife of silence, while he had heard of many who wished to cure their wives of talking too much. Certainly they had not meant to be cruel, but words spoken lightly can be. Home again, John was out 2 pigs, 4 days' work, and had nothing. Ever seeking ways to cure Mercy, he pondered night and day. The vision of roses came to him towards dawn on what had been a blustery, storm-swept night, while he lay tossing in troubled sleep at Mercy's side. He said afterward his sensations were those of a dreamer on the edge of wakening. He said afterwards his sensations were those of a dreamer on the edge of wakening. He became aware of the room being filled with the scent of fresh roses. Then came the vision, hundreds of roses exploding in a sweet, cool rush, filling the humble room from floor to ceiling with scarlet. The flowers burst, showering lush petals first in a hot red rain, then drying, dying as they fell. From the dying flowers emerged the face of a young woman, a delicate foreign face, encircled in a tangle of shining blue-black hair. The eyes. Never had John seen such eyes, hollow yet glowing, urgent, phosphorescent. They seemed to peer from the depths of some deep, dark cave where one might enter and never return. What could this mean? John shook his head fearfully, silently asking the vision what it wished of him. Those tender red lips moved, saying, "Come to me in the village, John. I have not long to stay." John, violently shaken, came wide awake. Had Mercy seen the vision too? He looked into her face. She was asleep. He touched her. Lightning flashed. In the brief brightness her cheeks glowed. He smoothed back the fall of her rich brown hair. Asleep, Mercy was the lovely girl he had courted, the woman he would ever love and cherish. Awake, she was the cold and voiceless stranger he had come to avoid, to dread. In anguish he cried out, laying a hand upon her bare shoulder. "I've been called to go to the village. Speak to me, Mercy, before I go." Mercy, hearing her name called, lifted her face, warm and dewy from sudden awakening. Her lips parted, making no sound. Her soft eyes filled with tears. She turned away. John leaped from the bed, pulled on his clothes swiftly. Hurrying to the barn, he saddled the brown horse named Ned. Neighbors hearing the early dawn traveler were surprised to see their quiet neighbor John Young riding past like a madman. Watching, they were certain he had become one. Some 6 went to stay with Mercy to protect her if need be. Once at the village, somehow John knew just where he must go, where he would find the strange woman who had called to him in the night. With the new morning sun at his back, he rode directly to the home of Judge Brown, an influential man in the county who minded affairs of the law. John stood on the steps, looked into the screened-in porch. There lay the young woman whose face he had seen in the vision of roses. There lay the roses, too, a great spray of them clasped in her slender white hands. She lay dead in a plank box, the likes of which is given to the poor for their last resting-place. "John, young lad," the judge shuffled to the door in carpet slippers, "I heard your horse." The kindly man pushed open the door. Come in, come in. You're like an answer to a prayer, son." The two stood before the plain coffin, John as mute as Mercy had been these long months. The judge pointed a thick finger toward the dead woman. "The gypsy woman." Before he could explain further, a small boy with the delicate face and clustering blue-black curls of the dead woman darted from the living room into the porch. He hung back at the sight of the broad-shouldered man whose tall figure dominated the porch. "A gypsy woman," the judge said again, "left behind. Lost, God only knows. She died sometime during the night up on the road above the village. The woman laid her out here for lack of another place." The judge clamped a hand on John's shoulders. Only then did John turn away from the still mother and look down at the vibrant child. "This is the gypsy woman's boy, John. He'll be needing a ma and a pa. I thought you might take him since you've lost your own. How'd you know?" It was the John's turn to be silent then, for the child was in John's arms as if he belonged there. The judge walked inside to a desk, pretending not to see the tears rolling down John's strong, honest face. "You'll take him, then?" John nodded, a light of hope in his eyes that hadn't shone there in a long, long time. "Then we'll make out the papers. I'll stand for character witness should you need one." Snuggled in a borrowed blanket, the frail child rode before John on the horse Ned those long, joyous, hopeful miles back home. Mercy, hearing the horse's pounding hoofs, came timidly to meet them at the gate. Still without speaking, for he could not, John thrust the starved, weary child into Mercy's arms, a feverish sweat of love and of hope on his own face. The child, all trembling, put his face close to Mercy's neck and held still there. He clung close as a baby possum when that old one had been killed and the tree split and the young ones dug out of the nest. "He'll be our baby," John said, his face wet. Mercy held the child out from her breast, looking into the small, pinched face. His large black eyes were such wells of misery as to make a heart break. The change the child in her arms brought to Mercy was almost beyond belief. "Our baby," her lips moved, forming the words. "Our baby?" she whispered. Then a cry burst from her of such joy as seldom heard in this world. She kissed John's face, calling his name over and over. "Ain't a living soul can take him from us," John whispered, clasping them both in his arms. Mercy pressed the child to her as if she would never let go. Then, talking, laughing, crying, she showed the child to first one of the gathered neighbors and then to the next. Those who witnessed the bringing of the child vowed they could never forget it, ever. All told the tale afterwards in their own ways, for a Christmas story before a glowing fire. They had never known a wonder equal to it before, or would again. But the most amazing wonder of all might be how the dying mother projected her face to John Young, sending to him the message for the welfare of her child in the vision of roses. Uncle Ned Kunkle. Uncle Ned Kunkle lived on the tip-top of Mount Baldy. He shared a 2-room cabin with 14 other happy-go-lucky Kunkles and was the laziest man known. Mama always added that he had a kind heart. "It's Uncle Ned's nature to be idle," Papa Kunkle said, "and a man don't go against his own nature." The truth was, the other Kunkles were much different from Uncle Ned. People in the valley said they weren't worth shooting. Anything in the Kunkle cabin that fell apart stayed apart. The Kunkles couldn't mend the roof when it rained, and anybody knew there was no use fooling around up there when the sun was shining. The west end of the barn had been near all torn off for kindling, so that when a cold wind blew, the Kunkle goat, Captain John, caught a sneezing fit every time. Captain John had his own kind of revenge by catching the Kunkles when they weren't looking, and buttoned them 9 ways for Sunday. It was a good life the Kunkles lived up there on Mount Baldy, with never a worry for something to eat. "As long as the possum crop holds out, we'll always have meat on the table," Papa said. And they did. There's crisp fried possum for breakfast, possum stew for lunch, and possum stuffed with cornbread dressing for supper. Getting back to Uncle Ned, there came a day in late summer when he didn't show up for breakfast. The Kunkles being so easy-going and all, Mama was not alarmed. But when he didn't show up for possum stew in the middle of the day, Mama said, "Lute, you better go rustle up your Uncle Ned. I see the top of his hat and the flies buzzing round it out there under the oak tree. He's nigh covered up with fallen leaves." Lute shuffled out into the yard as told. The trip in he made at a faster pace. "Ma," Lute said, "Uncle Ned's dead." Darned if he wasn't. The Kunkles all wept some because, although they hadn't mentioned it in a year or two, they were all quite fond of Uncle Ned and used to having him to step around or over. The weepin' done, Papa Kunkle pulled a few boards off the shed. Lute found a tin can with some rusty nails in it, and little Clay dragged the hammer out from under the porch where someone had flung it at a fly. The boys and Papa built a grave box and laid Uncle Ned out in it. He looked just fine, still wearing the old felt hat he was used to. Papa allowed he should have the church tie also, as it wasn't every day a man died. Mama said she would rue seeing the only stored tie in the house all covered with dirt, and where would they get another tie if one of the girls was to marry? "Don't trouble yourself on our account, Mama," said Sissy, the eldest Kunkle daughter, blushing furiously. "A strip of red calico will do for my Hank's weddin' tie. First come, first serve. Uncle Ned's dead afore I'm wed." Sissy looked around. The other girls bobbed their heads, and Sissy slipped the tie over Uncle Ned's head. Small matters settled, they prepared to bury Uncle Ned real close to the side door graveyard where the Kunkles had been laid away for the last 150 years. The grave wasn't dug more than 2 feet deep when the boys complained they were tired out. Papa didn't want to work them beyond their strength, he told Mama, so they began lowering the grave box with Uncle Ned inside into the shallow grave. Before they got it in, the bottom fell out. So did Uncle Ned. Papa said they were all right because Uncle Ned wasn't used to sleeping in a box anyway. They covered him up, and when it was all over and eyes dried, the Kunkles went inside and ate 2 whole possums stuffed with cornbread dressing. Way late that night, something happened out there in the graveyard that changed the life of all the Kunkles. Mama reared up out of the covers a time or two. She thought she heard something creeping. "There's something walking around out there amongst the dead, Papa," Mama said. "I do fear it may be Uncle Ned." "Uncle Ned wasn't one to wear hisself out pacing about in his lifetime. I reckon he ain't likely to take it up after death," Papa said. He grunted and rolled over and went back to sleep. When it was coming on to daybreak, Mama crept out of bed and peeked out through a chink in the wall. What she saw and the squawk she let out brought every last Kunkle scooting. There were hundreds of possums out there. They covered the burial ground like a moving gray blanket. Because the grave was so shallow, the possums had sniffed out Uncle Ned and eaten him all up. When the Kunkles all leaned over the spot, they found there was nothing left of Uncle Ned but the skull with the brown felt hat still on it, and underneath the chin bone, the brown church tie. Mama snatched that tie from among the bones and whacked it over her knee to dust it off. With all those possums running every which way, the Kunkle boys, from force of habit, each laid hold of 2 apiece, holding them by the tails. "You let go them possum," Papa bellowed. "Eating them possums would be the same as eating Uncle Ned," Mama wailed. And all the possums scattered, looking back over their shoulders with a reddish cast about their grinning mouths, and bits and pieces of Uncle Ned Kunkle stuck between their teeth. The upshot of the whole thing was the Kunkles had to turn to work for a living. Mom and the girls made a garden, and Papa and the 3 oldest boys took a job of work down the mountain at Kingdom Ford, building a road. With new clothes on their backs and shoes on their feet, the younger Kunkles went to school. Mama and Papa Kunkle lived to see half a dozen of their children graduate from the 8th grade. With new lumber they fixed up the west end of the barn, and Captain John, the family goat, lived to a good old age in fair humor. Every boy in the family and Papa wore a new store tie at Sissy and Hank's wedding. Who would have thought Uncle Ned, who never changed a thing while he was alive, would come to change everything having to do with the Kunkles after he was dead? The twins. The Bellamans were an isolated couple. In the beginning, when this peculiar pair were younger, their nearest neighbors who lived miles away made tentative, exploring visits. Their friendly approaches were answered only with blank faces and meaningless grunts. For years now the Bellamans had been left to themselves. Like other hill folks, they wrested a bare living from the hard, red clay soil. They kept a few chickens and a dozen or so hardy ducks which had somehow escaped the questing turtles and swam quacking in a nearby creek. A rangy pig or two snuffed for acorns under the oaks. The pride and joy of the Bellamans, if they could be attributed such lofty passions, was a team of grays. The aging horses were named Bobbins and Ribbons. The stout team hauled logs from the woods for winter's fuel and pulled the creaking wagon on the few trips Ben Bellaman made to the country store for coffee and such goods. In the late fall the Bellamans prepared for winter. The dried beans were hulled, sorted for sticks and pebbles, bagged and hung in the attic. Potatoes were dug and stored in straw under the floorboards. A pig was butchered, and slabs of pork were salted, wrapped in burlap, and shoved under the bed. The Bellamans might have lived out their days in peace and quiet, living and dying no more counted than the rabbits in the woods, if it hadn't been for the twins. No one could have been more astonished than Ben and Ann Bellaman at this unpleasant trick nature turned, as squatting in the row while digging potatoes one day, Ann gave birth to the twins. After the initial shock, the couple tried to go on as usual. The twins grew with the utter disregard according to chickens, ducks, and pigs. Once they were afoot, the twins were put out in the morning and forgotten until twilight. When Anne discovered that, unlike the chickens, the fox had no design on the twins, the two children were left out at night also, as they did nothing but make a stir and commotion indoors. The twins were soon left to shift completely for themselves about the woods and creek. Anne and Ben, not being talkers themselves, gave no thought to the twins never speaking. Why should they? Grunts and grabs filled their simple needs. The boy and girl were past 4 years old when a chance passerby inquired their names. When he learned they had none, he pointed out to Anne and Ben it was custom children should be named. The only names familiar to the Bellamans were the names of their two horses, Bobbins and Ribbons. So the twins were handily named for the horses, the boy Bobbins and the girl Ribbons. By the time the twins were 7 years old, they could scamper up a tree fast as squirrels. They were shy and watchful as swamp mink, and were seen, if at all, scuttling over roofs, peering from behind trees, or vanishing into the dense woods like the mist before the sun. Their playmates were the pigs. They pursued them gleefully, squealing until they couldn't tell from the sound which were twins and which were four-footed porkers. Their only solid friends were the two horses whose namesakes they were, Bobbins and Ribbons. Many nights the twins bedded in the straw of the stable with the gentle, warm animals. Growing older and woods-wise, the twins began to prowl a larger area. The neighborhood around couldn't help but take notice of them. The gangly, ragged boy and girl were apt to pop up suddenly as mushrooms on a warm day. They scooped the food from unguarded dinner tables with joyous whoops, quicker than folks could move. But usually, like other woods creatures, they were not seen. Only a table or cupboard laid bare told the wild pair had called. As hill people deny no one food, even though they themselves are down to their last biscuit, no one complained. One eventful day, a school teacher from the distant one-room school found his way on horseback to the Bellamans' clapboard and log house. "It's the law," he told Ben, "that children should be sent to school." Ben only grunted in reply. Still he held great terror and respect for the law, and so the next Monday the twins were rounded up. This took much doing on Ben's part, as they could outrun him. He coaxed them near with chunks of white bread. The unruly twins were then variously persuaded and beaten as far as the one-room schoolhouse, shrieking all the way. As soon as Ben and the big stick departed, so did the fearful twins by way of the open window. With them went a half-dozen of the other children's lunch pails. This was Bobbins and Ribbons' first and last brush with education and civilization. As they continued to grow, they became more savage. Although kept out of the house by a watchful Ben and Ann, they were a threat in many ways. They were worse than the fox for stealing the chickens. They carried off every egg the ducks laid alongside the creek, and worried the pigs thin, hooting and hollering after them through the woods. By night they dug up the new potatoes, and by day they picked the green beans from the stalks. By now Ben had given up the switch he first carried, and armed himself with a sizable club. Still, the hungry twins outwitted their parents. A chilly afternoon in November, while Ann and Ben were off getting up wood, the twins raided the house, carrying off a bag of cornmeal and a slab of pork from underneath the bed. Ben, in rage, set out after them. He sighted the two before a blazing fire, chewing on the half-raw meat. From then on, life for Ben and Ann was one hazard after the other. They boarded up the two windows and barred the one door. The twins were bold. They feared neither man nor beast, as they were able to outrun both. But there was one thing they could not outrun, and which they feared mightily: thunderstorms. Stormy nights the Bellamans huddled with dread inside the house, for the children could be heard whimpering and mewling beyond the door, begging to be allowed inside. At last, bleeding, bellowing, they would be forced to take shelter with the horses in the barn. Time passed. Ben and Ann were careful to keep together. Once Ann, caught alone at the house by Bobbins and Ribbons, had been overpowered when she attempted to bar the door. Egged on by the smell of baking bread, the twins had beaten her back. Throwing her to the floor, they snatched the hot bread from the oven and sped away with yells of victory. The last she saw of them was their flying heels vanished into the brush. The last 2 winters they were said to have sheltered in one of the many deep, unexplored caves beyond the bluffs. The story of the ill-fated twins, named for their father's horses, ended late one night. A mighty storm came up. Ben and Ann barred the door, then lay quiet under the quilts, preparing for the worst being the onslaught of their terrified offspring. They waited for their coming as one awaits doom. The thunder rolled and cracked as it hadn't for many a days. The twins arrived. They begged to be let in, screaming and banging at the quivering wooden door. Ben and Ann became even more apprehensive when the crying ceased. The twins were no longer howling. Why? Peering through the cracks in the door, they saw why. Their long hair wet and streaming, their mouths drooping open with hysterical fright, their eyes brilliant as double lights in the lightning flashes. Bobbin and Ribbons heaved a great log between them. They were going to smash their way into the house. They intended to batter down the door. As Ben and Ann quaked and drew back, the twins ran, crashing the log into the door with all their combined might. The whole house quivered. To the bewildered parents, the children seemed like demons or devils attempting to gain entrance. Ben took up a big stick of wood, opened the door, and raced after the pair. He was gone into the night a long, long while. The twins were found several days later, their heads crushed in by fallen timber, Ben said. That was the end of the troublesome twins their own parents had grown to fear and hate. If anyone suspected they came to their end by any other than the natural means of the storm, no one ever said. And so Bobbins and Ribbons were quietly buried, considered by all to be sorrowful victims of the storms they had feared. The Snipe Hunt. A singular tale was being told about the hills regarding the death of Enoch Schrader. His body had been found in the timber the morning after a fierce rainstorm. A trembling old man passed through, having sought shelter in a deserted cabin, claimed he was wakened in the early morning hours by a strange wailing, by such sounds as no human throat on the face of the earth could utter. He said he looked out into the night. A man-sized monster was running a zigzag course across the open space fronting the timber. The monster's body was made of snakes, he said, but his head was human. It was a story too wild to believe. Still, Enoch's body had been found in the timber, and his footprints tracked by the men after they came on his body formed a twisting, crazy maze, evidence perhaps of a man running in mindless fear. The sheriff, a reasonable man, said he knew what happened. Enoch had been walking up the ravine and was swept up in the flash flood waters. He managed to save himself, only to perish of exhaustion or a heart attack in the timber. The strange part, though, was how the footprints of Enoch Schrader, a slender man, were sunk so deep in the earth all the way from the ravine into the timber, as if he were carrying a very heavy burden. Also, a sickening, fearsome odor hung about the dead man and his clothing. The tale of the snake monster which had brought Enoch to his death was bandied about and bravely scorned by the young men, but older hands pondered the death with suspicion. They hinted in whispers of spectral beings rising from the depths of the old mine pits, scampering about under cover of night, of awful, unhuman beings which were apt to come at rare times from the crevices and crannies of the black caves, cavorting along hidden byways and long, unused lanes. It was one of these unspeakable monsters, the old folks said, Enoch had chanced upon after his ordeal by the storm. He paid the price. Death. It was about this time Myron Drew, a pale-faced, thin-chested, bookish young man from the East, wandered into the mountains seeking health and employment. Being quick with sums, he was taken on as a clerk at the general store. Myron worked hard behind the counter, trying to make friends while measuring out lengths of calico and weighing sugar. The storekeeper's wife, a kindly woman, gave some motherly attention to Myron. "You're a rackety cough there, lad," she said. "I'll make you up a batch of mullein syrup." "Don't trouble yourself, ma'am," Myron said gratefully, but you could see a lump rise in his throat at the small attention. Big Buck Kunkle from up top of Old Baldy was everything Myron wasn't. A big, strapping, easy-going fellow. He could have a good-sized calf over his shoulder and walk uphill with it if he had a mind to. He had a long, firm stride, a deep, ready laugh, and a rowdy sense of fun. You could just see Myron's eyes light up with admiration whenever Big Buck Kunkle came tramping into the store, dressed as he usually was in checkered lumber jacket and muddy knee-high boots. So one day, when Buck suggested Myron go with him and some others on a snipe hunt, Myron was flattered as could be. There was nothing Buck liked better than to play a harmless joke on a greenhorn. He'd figure this one out all by himself, tramping along the wheel-rifted road which followed the winding creek down Baldy. It was early fall season. A brisk wind was blowing. Nuts were dropping from trees with a friendly rattling sound. Bright sunflowers still nodded in sunny places. This time of year pokeberries hung red ripe on their tall stalks. An old neighbor gathering poke roots to treat her man's knee joints greeted Big Buck. "Bound for home?" "Yes, ma'am," Big Buck grinned back. "I'll just pack that bag of roots along to your place as I pass. Save you a carrying." "Thank you, Big Buck," the old woman said. "You're a good boy. Always been. But you have a touch of spice about you. There's a gleam in your eye or I'm losing my sight. What devilment you up to now?" Big Buck laughed long and loud. "Shucks! Me and that new store clerk and some others, we are going snipe hunting come Saturday night." "You're a plumb fool for playing tricks, Big Buck." The old woman passed him the heavy sack. "Mind they don't backfire on you one of these days. You don't know what all could be about in the night. Remember Enoch Schrader?" Saturday night came, and Big Buck and a half-dozen other young men out of the hills went walking through the dark in an isolated area, following a seldom-used trail. Myron Drew hurried, panting to keep up, all a-quiver with excitement. He stumbled, shifted the old rifle Big Buck had loaned him from one shoulder to the other. "I've never been snipe hunting before," he said, innocent as a newborn babe, when he could get his breath. Everyone laughed merrily. "Remember, you gotta whistle all the time," Big Buck said, grinning from ear to ear in the dark. "Them gosh darn snipe just love the sound of a whistle." "I've been practicing," Myron said stoutly. "That's good. That's just fine." Big Buck Kunkle fetched Myron a friendly slap on the back, near knocking the skinny little clerk flat. The others hid their snickers and coughing and exchanged punches in the ribs. "There's storm clouds laying up there on the mountain," Myron pointed, looking uneasily at the streaks of lightning that lit up the peak. "You think rain will trouble the snipe?" "Nah, runs right off their backs like water." Big Buck laughed hard at his own joke. They crossed Brown Mule Gulch, a deep ravine running through a stretch of heavy timber. At a spot as lonely as the end of the world, Big Buck stopped and handed Myron a length of heavy rope. "Now tie this round your middle. Here's a tow sack, the ends held up by a barrel hoop." From a pocket, Big Buck took a handful of tallow candles. He lighted one and handed it to Myron. "Now," Big Buck said, holding his face straight, "all you do is set this bag at the edge of the gully, hold the open end towards the timber, scooch down behind here's sack, and hold the lighted candle high." He paused, about to burst with laughter. "Now that rope you can use if a great big overgrown snipe comes along, needs wrestling down and tying." At this remark there was an outburst of coughing among the onlookers. "You can lay the rifle here," Buck went on. "We want you to have something to protect yourself with in case the snake monster that done in Enoch Schrader comes along." At this offhand remark poor Myron's face turned the color of the tallow candle, but Big Buck went right on giving directions. "Start whistling loud and long, and keep on whistling. The rest of us'll do the real hard part on account of you're not used to the hills. We'll mosey off a ways and beat the bushes, driving up the snipe. The minute that sack is full of snipe, all you gotta do is pull the barrel hoop out, and they're yourn." "Will do," Myron cried, his face bright in the candlelight, but glancing too from side to side. "I didn't know I'd be left all alone. You won't be far, will you, fellas?" "Nah, don't forget to hold the candle high. That light shows the snipe how to get here without tripping." "Oh, all right," Myron said. Leaving him alone, the young men scattered. For the next few minutes they made a lot of noise and commotion. They thrashed about, shouting and beating the bushes, all the time getting farther and farther away. Then everyone headed for home, except Big Buck. "I'll stay and see he gets back safe," he said, not minding the rising storm clouds and threatening thunder. Big Buck found himself a comfortable place in the shelter of the gully, out of the wind. He slapped his thighs, laughing hard, wiped the tears of enjoyment from his eyes, ate half a dozen batter biscuits from his pocket, and went to sleep. Poor Myron! Hours later, having borne the storm for some time, drenched by the pelting rain, having whistled until he could whistle no more, he gave up. He slogged along through the dark, following the ravine's edge for guidance. He hadn't gone far when he heard the blood-curdling sound the first time. A sound so forbidden, a sound so dreadful, Myron froze where he stood. He listened. The cry came again. Enoch Schrader? The snake monster? Or another joke? Myron laughed weakly, but his hands were icy. He ventured a few shaky steps farther. Nearby was the roar and rush of water, the ravine flooding from the cloudburst. Trembling with a grim foreboding, Myron tried to turn away. He couldn't. There were those cries again, and now he knew that voice. Big Buck. The snake monster or something had got hold of Big Buck. "Is that you, Buck?" The clock's reedy voice carried above the rushing water. Mercifully, the pouring rain had slackened and stopped. With cautious steps, Myron moved towards the ravine. Underfoot, the soggy ground buckled. He caught himself from slipping, staggered back. "Buck!" Myron's fearful, shrill voice carried out over the boiling ditch where the raving, rushing water had washed out a deep sinkhole. Something was thrashing around down there. Myron was shaking hard, but he pulled one of the tallow candles from his jacket. He managed to light it. What he saw below in the wisp of light from that single sputtering flame made his eyes bulge. He screamed and turned to run. Then he spun around, staring into the black, throbbing waters. Big Buck was down there and making those sounds all right, but it wasn't the Big Buck Myron knew. This was only Buck's large head. The rest of him, as much as Myron could see, was covered with twisting snakes. Snakes were everywhere, churning the water, clustering around him. Gray-spotted, usually harmless water snakes, washed out of their warm holes in the upper gulch, were now trapped in this hole of icy fresh water with Buck. Snakes circled him, their pale heads lifted, their jet bead-sized eyes searching, their glistening bodies gliding, wrapping around him. Drawn by the heat of his body, they clung to him, the only source of warmth. The mass of them was slowly drawing him under the foaming water. Big Buck clawed frantically, the snakes hanging from his reaching arms like revolting jewelry. Giddy with the horror of it, holding the candle high, Myron croaked with terror. A hoarse cry from Buck Kunkle's wide-open red mouth came again. "Quick! For God's sakes, help me!" Myron moved then swiftly, sticking the candle into the mud amongst the sheltering roots of a giant oak. He yanked the rope from his waist. He knotted it in the thickest of the roots. Trying not to look the nightmarish scene below, he lowered himself the few feet to the water's edge. An evil, nameless stench rose up to meet him. Breathing hard, praying, he caught hold of one of Buck's flailing hands. He placed that hand upon the rope. Big Buck's steel-band fingers held tight. With his free hand and his kicking feet, Myron fought off the snakes that now sought him too, hanging from him like wet, winding ribbons. "Hold on!" he shouted. "Keep fighting!" With help at hand, regaining command of himself, Buck did. He hauled himself up the rope after Myron, hand over hand, weighted down by the living, loathsome cloak. The snakes clung, never biting, only coiling about his thick legs, his body, his very throat. Together Myron and the big Buck dragged themselves up onto the bank. Freed from the nightmarish horde at last, Big Buck lay moaning. Myron stayed beside him, talking softly. The entire story of the snipe hunt and that followed didn't come out for quite a while. Big Buck told it. The usual folks were all sitting around the glowing heating stove in the store. Myron was behind the counter unpacking chewing tobacco. That's how they found out what happened to Enoch Schrader. They understood then the heavy weight that had caused his feet to sink into the earth as he ran zigzagging toward the timber, and why he dropped dead. The snakes had all slithered away as the body cooled. The men understood, too, how two such unlikely folk as Big Buck Kunkle and Skinny Myron Drew became such good and lasting friends. The Yellow Cat. By the same reasoning that a litter of kittens born by chance in an oven are not biscuits, so the yellow cat Mamie found sitting under the wheel of Glim's old truck was not Glim. But it was thought-provoking that the yellow cat should have turned up there on the very afternoon Mamie Herschel came home from her husband Glim's funeral. The eyes were the same, she said, and the cat's and Glim's a bright hazel. The yellow cat started right off saving Mamie's life. Mamie became lost in the swamp one afternoon while out hunting mushrooms. She got herself mired in the soft slime up to her waist and spent the night in the swamp under a chilling rain. That evening the cat was seen at the neighbors, meowing frantically. It wasn't until the next day, though, that people took note of the cat's calling. Henry Fry and the missus followed the cat as he headed into the swamp. They pulled Mamie out of the muck and helped her home. "You can't turn your back on an animal like that," Mamie said, although she had never been especially fond of cats, and so the yellow Tom had a home with her forever afterwards. From then on days, the cat stuck as close to Mamie as Clem had in life. Every step she took out of doors, he was at her heels. Clem in life, Mamie said, had been as jealous and watchful a husband. Every night when Mamie went to bed, she found the cat perched upon the window ledge outside her bedroom window. You wouldn't see Mamie without that cat, or the cat without Mamie. It became evident after the yellow Tom led rescuers to Mamie in the swamp that he was no ordinary mouser. As it turned out, his work was cut out for him, saving Mamie again from another danger. From there came a time in Mamie's life when she welcomed suitors. Ray, a hired man, was the first to come calling. That cat tumbled him time and again off the back porch by whining between his legs. Ray wasn't the most graceful of men. After so many bruises, he became uneasy, taking the falls as a sort of omen, and left off calling. The second suitor fell and near drowned in the cistern while pulling up a pail of wash water as he was gallantly assisting Mamie. What happened was the yellow Tom ran straight up his bending back, claws out as if the man was a tree. Mamie lowered the rope and bucket, helping him out of the cistern. He never came back, either. The third man nearly smashed his aged car into a tree in Mamie's yard while trying to avoid the yellow Tom. Mamie served the suitor tea to calm his nerves. The yellow cat, shut out of the house, paced angrily back and forth on the porch, leaping at the nearest windows and peering suspiciously inside. At last, slipping into the house somewhere, the cat chewed a large ragged hole into the third suitor's coat. Then he spilled the pot of hot tea in his lap by jumping on the table. "That cat," Mamie laughed later, "caused me to lose Ray, Joe, and then Fred Broyles." That cat is Clem come back to life after Mamie neighbors said as the years passed, those three didn't amount to much anyway. Mamie gave up the idea of marrying again. She lived with the yellow cat by her side, a contented widow, for 12.5 years. When one day she died peacefully and was quietly buried, a kindly neighbor went over to feed the yellow cat. The cat was not on Mamie's porch, though, or in her house. In fact, the yellow cat had disappeared and was never seen again. Giant. Once seen, a giant isn't easily forgotten. Ask Mary Ann Groves. Now Mary Ann was no stranger to trouble, she being born low center of a family of 10. Papa was sick most of the time and not able to work. Old man Trouble and his brother Hunger not only lurked around the corner, but rounded it, staring them in the face. That pair of hard-hearted, unfeeling fellows gave Mary Ann Groves and the whole family many a sorrowful time. This Mary Ann learned to accept, but not ever the terror of seeing a giant. The day was an ordinary and pleasant one. All morning Mary Ann played grocery back of the shed. She sacked dirt, pretending it was sugar, then coffee, then flour. What good about dirt is that it can be anything you want it to. A wide, rough board was the counter of Mary Ann's grocery store. Rosie and Jane, Mary Ann's little sisters, were the customers. The money they used to pay for the dirt, sugar, coffee, and flour was smooth, small chips selected from the woodpile. Mary Ann could count. She was going on 6. "Growing up," Mama often remarked these days, "this September you'll be trotting off to school with your older brothers and sisters." "I guess I better not," Mary Ann was likely to answer. "Who'll take care of Rosie and Jane for you?" Near noon that day, when the sun was high, their older sister Maggie came shouting for them. At the sight of such dusty faces and hands, she let out a howl of disapproval. That's when Maggie reminded them what was bad about dirt, so they had to wash up at the pump. Rosie and Jane were put to their naps on a small bed in Mama's room downstairs. Mary Ann, being a big girl now, had to go upstairs alone. The stairs in this house were closed off by a door that opened right into the first stair. 4 steps up was the first landing. Turn right, another dozen steps, and you were upstairs. The house was very quiet. It was a warm afternoon. Mary Ann had just closed the stair door, which separated her from the rest of the world. The stairs were even quieter than the rest of the house. She skipped up the first 3 steps before she knew. One foot was poised to take the last step when she saw the giant. It stood back off the upstairs banister, looking down. The giant was covered from head to foot with something raggedy, brown, and furry. Its head brushed the ceiling. Its broad body filled the hall the whole way across. Its eyes glowed like power lights. And the face. The face was all hair with teeth and those staring eyes. The shocking sight of a giant in her own upstairs filled Mary Ann with horror. She wished to cry out for Papa to save her. Papa was right there on the other side of the door. Papa. Papa. She wondered with all her pounding heart to scream for Papa to help her, but her lips were still, and she couldn't move the rest of her. She could only stand there, looking upward. Like a voiceless stone she was, only quivering, her eyes wide and staring. An agony of sweat poured down her clothing, dampening her. Gradually the giant began to move. It eased along the banister, coming towards her, eyes blazing, teeth bared. The huge open hand reaching out for her brought a tearing scream to Marianne's lips. She felt herself falling. Everything went dark. When Marianne awoke, she was being held tight and safe in Papa's arms. The family had gathered around. She began to scream and sob again, pointing to the stairs. "A giant, Papa! I seen it!" Papa climbed the stairs with her in his arms. Mama followed close behind. Papa showed Marianne plain as day there was no giant on the stairs now. Where had the giant gone? Marianne looked at the open windows. Why had it come reaching for her? From where? Where did giants live? There had been a giant on the stairs, with staring, hungry eyes and teeth. "A tall tramp, maybe," Papa said. "Hiding in the attic, maybe," Mama said. Papa searched the attic. He found only a heap of old clothes. After cutting the buttons off for saving, Mama burned the clothes. Marianne, seeing the giant, happened a long while ago. She grew up in the hills, never seeing another giant, or caring to, but she never forgot that day. Even now, a woman grown and beyond childish imaginings, she on occasion catches herself drawn back in sudden fear before a closed door. And when she reaches stories of sightings of strange, hairy, man-like creatures, called Sasquatch by some, Bigfoot by others, said to roam isolated mountain and marsh areas, she believes and shudders. Some folks scoff, but not Marianne Groves. She saw the giant close up. It was real and alive. She once felt the body heat of it, there upon the stairs. The Feather Reader. Nanny Firkin was a feather reader. It was an art, she said, she had from her German grandma. People with courage enough or desperation enough could take a pillow for Nanny Firkin to read. The twists and twirls and knots in the feathers told the fortune and future of the head which had lain on the pillow. When Nanny's mood was right, which wasn't every day, she would read the state and fate of any pillow user. If her mood wasn't right, folks could leave their pillows overnight in Nanny's one-room cabin. Nanny accepted no goods nor gratuities for her feather readings, as these, she said, would take the truth and purity from her forecast. Many of her predictions took years to come about, which was to be expected, as Nanny's speciality was futures. Still, if you stayed in the hills long enough and cared enough, you would see many of her forecasts come true. 3 of Nanny Firkin's most puzzling feather readings come readily to mind. 1. Riley Link was a guitar-playing son of a gun. Riley was also tall and lithe, with a light foot for dancing, a flashing smile, and a quick wit. All the girls in the hills and valleys round were crazy about Riley. He had only to curl his finger and they came running, delighted. Their mammas weren't. They pointed out time and again that Riley never minded if he worked or not. He'd never been known yet to take a job of work. Riley just rode his horse from barn dance to barn dance. There he would strum his guitar and sing, sweating, grinning, and shoving that curly black hair of his back from his forehead. Stomping his feet and jigging, he carried on the whole night through and ended up sleeping in the hay. Riley was the loudest and ablest square dance caller around, and the despair of mammas keeping an eye out toward a good, sound husband for the bright-eyed daughters. From the very first, Mary Lou Brighton was smitten with abundant charms of Riley Link. Her mamma, nervous as a setting hen with a weasel in her coop, set about to discredit Riley in her daughter's eyes, pointing out that Riley was lazy and a wastrel and would amount to nothing, besides not coming to a good end. Bothered Mary Lou not at all. And so in desperation, Mama surreptitiously got a hold of the very pillow Riley had laid his curly dark head upon since he was a lad. With pounding heart in the pillow, she marched off to have Riley Link's future read. Nanny Firkin, pressing and pushing her dry old fingers among the knots, allowed Riley had quite a fortune to be told. Mama had been certain of this all along. Nanny told her she should leave the pillow and return one day soon. Mama left. Several days later, having come afoot the mile up the rocky path unto the mountain, Mama inquired humbly, "Have you read Riley's pillow yet?" Nanny took a fresh pinch of orange snuff. She counted the brown age spots on her hand. She was a caution for keeping one waitin'. At last she leaned close, squinting into Mama's fearful eyes. You may not understand this. What's going to happen to the person whose head laid on this pillow shouldn't happen to a left-handed poacher. What did you find? Mama gasped. Now Nanny Fanny was a crusty old creature with no sentiment and short on niceties. Feel for yourself. She shoved the pillow with its mysterious twirls, whirls, and telltale knots of feathers into Mama's outstretched hands. The story is there in the shapes. Nanny ran her quick finding fingers once again over the structure of the feathers. There, can you feel them strips the shape of two arms? But there's something unusual about these arms, something I've not found before in a pillow. What? Mama almost shrieked, begging. What? These arms have no hands. No hands? Mama turned weak and pale. What can that mean? Is there anything else? City streets. Nanny spit into the gray ashes of the stove pan. Noise, thunderous noise, so much one person could not hear another speak. Yes, just as Mama had suspected, Riley Link's fortune was eerie, his future suspect. Mama tried to get more details out of the old woman, but Nanny Firkin had set the skinning of a rabbit for her supper and would say no more. Clutching the pillow, pasty face as a new spring mushroom, Mama headed lickety-split down the mountain. She smacked her lips, satisfied. Not that she wished ill on anyone. That was not her way. Her mind leaped from disaster to disaster, puzzled. An automobile wreck? Riley had never owned an automobile in his life. An explosion? Old Bill Link was always talking about clearing stumps from the North 40. Whatever. Mama caught her breath. Something fearful awful lay in Riley's future. She would tell Mary Lou at once that she wouldn't be allowed to keep company any longer with a young man who had such frightening feathers. Time will tell, Mama muttered, thankful now that she had been devoted enough to filch Riley's pillow. She couldn't help blushing scarlet, though. Taking that pillow was the most wicked thing she'd done in her whole life. There was a lot of praying to be done for forgiveness, but the good Lord understood her mother's heart. 3 weeks later, Mary Lou ran off with Riley Link, in spite of being told by Mama, time after time, with passionate gestures of Nanny Firkin's dire predictions. Everybody set upon Riley, him being a married man now, to take a job of serious work. 2 years and 2 babies later, he got tired of hearing about it. Leaving Mary Lou in tears, Riley went off to the city. Mary Lou defended Riley. She still loved him and always would, she said, even while Mom and Papa supplied the food that went into the mouths of the 2 little ones and herself. Mary Lou was a good worker, but between times she took to staring out the window and walking to the end of the lane, watching off in the direction of the city. All the while her Mama murmured and wrung her hands, waiting for the thing without hands that was going to happen to Riley. Nanny Firkin had been right too often. Riley soon learned that folks in the city were as set on his working to pay bills as folks in the country had been. He had hoped that strumming the guitar on a song or two would bring a goodly amount of money. It wasn't so. Riley had to eat and have a roof over his head. He took a job in an airplane-making factory, and that's where it happened. A frightful accident with machinery. Both Riley's hands were caught off at the wrists. Mary Lou rushed to the hospital to be at his side. For a dreadful space of time they didn't know if Riley's life would be saved or not. But at last Riley and Mary Lou returned together to the hills, the green hills that always take you back and forgive you, same as Mary Lou did Riley. One of Riley's wrists was fitted with an iron hook, and the other with a sort of a scissors, and everything turned out well, considering, because having no hands never changed Riley's happy ways. He was able and light-hearted as ever, and learned to do about everything with these tools on the ends of his arms. With the insurance money, he and Mary Lou started a little one-room store. Mama and everyone helped, too. Folks came to buy just to hear Riley laugh and sing. Soon there were more curly-headed, lovable, handsome Links running over the hills than you could count, and Mary Lou was as happy as a woman could be. 2. Another feather-reading Nanny made was for a hill boy named Audie. Audie was a hard-working, serious-minded boy. His own ambition was to escape the hard clay farm of his pa and be somebody. So as Audie himself fetched his pillow to Nanny Firkin, being in a rare good mood that bright day, she even brewed him a cup of her bitter black coffee. After 30 minutes of her bony fingers fumbling with his pillow feathers, Nanny tipped her head to one side and peered sharply into his young, impatient face. "Will I ever amount to anything?" Artie blurted out, his fingers clutching the edge of the bare plank table. "Yes," Nanny Firkin answered directly. "I feel in the feathers you will. You'll be going away soon. You will get into a new line of work and be very successful." Artie jumped up. He did a little dance, step around the tiny, dark, smelly room where Nanny did all her living. "There's more," Nanny said. "Sit down." She said it with such a grave tone that Artie did so at once. "Are you ready?" In his distraction, taking a gulp of the bitter, thick coffee, Artie nodded. I guess. There's only one I in your future." One I. Artie was overcome by fear. There's something not pleasant in such a message from one's feathers. "Those are the two important readings I find in your future," Nanny said, her crisp, thin voice softened for once. "Success and one eye." And so Artie left puzzled and a little frightened, wondering if he should have let well enough alone, as Papa always said. Nanny's forecast turned out to be explained by time. Within 6 months, Artie left the hills. He went to another state to visit a distant relative. There he took a small job in a growing radio broadcast company. Radio in those days just coming into its own. Eventually, he came to be the vice president and then the president of that company. His lack of formal education was made up for by ambition, hard work, and native intelligence. Even if he had only one eye, that eye was sharp. For Nanny's predictions had come true. Shortly after the reading of his feathers, Artie had been in the field picking corn. As he leaned down, a stalk stabbed him in the eye, and he lost the sight of it. 3. There are times one could wonder if there is any worth or wisdom in knowing of the future. There's certainly cause to wonder in the case of Buster Bear, as the lad was called from the time he was born. Buster had grown no hair on his body, and because of this was fearful and shy, a sort of hermit. But Buster Bear was by no means dumb for being hairless. One day he spied his pillow being carried off by his Aunt May to have the feathers read. Aunt May was interested in Buster. She declared his was a case, if ever there was one, for Nanny Firkin to study. Aunt May had always had a soft place in her heart for her sensitive nephew, and said so. Unknown to Aunt May, Buster slipped along behind her as she walked to consult Nanny Firkin. Buster Bear hid himself just outside Nanny Firkin's door with his ear pressed to a crack in the planks, listening. As Nanny Firkin's fingers felt out the feathers in Buster Bear's pillow, her tight old mouth became slack and her leathery face paled. "The head which laid on this pillow has no future," she rasped out when she could, in a doomsday tone. Aunt May began to blunder. "Then Buster's going to die?" Nanny Firkin slowly, finally added, "Aye." From outside the thin door, with its cracks and knotholes, the woman heard a long drawn-out wail. Buster Bear, listening, had heard every word spoken. Buster Bear had heard his own death sentence. Aunt May rushed out the door, but she was too late. The boy had run away. Later, the menfolk discovered where he had smashed himself to death over a 200-foot cliff, finding the body by the way the buzzards circled. He was the only fortune she had read in a long while, Nanny Firkin said later, which had no future. Nanny Firkin lived out her days in her snug little cabin in the backwoods, a legend in her own time, and to this day. Feather reading, she would say, her sharp eyes looking right into a person, was not something you learn from a book. You need to have the touch in the ends of your fingers. It took a lot of courage to carry your pillow to Nanny Firkin to be read, but once you had, you never forgot that visit. You never forgot the wonderful working of her nimble old fingers prodding your pillow and coming up with your future, which, before her keen eyes, you must take calmly, however sweet or bitter. Nobody ever counted the number of her predictions that came true, but everybody certainly walked up the narrow rocky path to her cabin with fearful, anxious, yet hopeful, excited step. The Woman Who Turned to Paper. Lucy Kinney slept on a gray, lumpy mattress on the floor of her one-room shack. With her slept her 13-year-old daughter, Kathy. 4 younger children shared the bed with its stir of patched quilts. Mike, who was born with water on the brain and paralyzed legs, slept alone on the couch. It was Lucy Kinney turned to paper. Back a few years ago, Lucy was a stout, happy-go-lucky woman. Her skin was glossy with health and good food, chicken to be exact. That was before Jess, her man, was sent to the penitentiary. Jess was a man, didn't have a milk cow or garden path or a job of work. One thing Jess did have was a persuasive way with hens. He had the lightest of touches, a gentle, unalarming manner of lifting a fat hen from a roost past midnight. Without a cackle, cluck, or squawk, the chickens came, and without the dropping of a feather. Hens in the neighbors' chicken houses became as scarce as gnats in November. As the chickens disappeared from the hen houses, the pile of feathers in the rear of Jess's shack grew. As the pile of feathers grew, complaints mounted among first the near and then more distant folk. They spoke bitterly of having no broth nor meat to go with their Sunday dumplings. Finally, there came to be a deal of finger-pointing, all in the direction of Jess Kinney. When Jess cleaned out the sheriff's coop, it was the last straw. They came for him, and Jess was sent to the penitentiary. Jess wasn't locked up a week, and the family was starving. The preacher wrote the commissioner of corrections at Springfield about the plight of Lucy and the kids. "We are busy with our own problems," the commissioner wrote back. "Miss Kinney and the children will have to do for themselves." What Jess wrote the preacher when he heard this was, "I'm supposed to pay for my mistakes, not Lucy and the kids." Some good folks finally got Lucy a job in a pants and shirt factory. Then Lucy got up before daylight and she came home after dark. Lucy sewed more than 1,000 hymns on trousers and shirts all day long. Buzz, 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 her fingers grew the scars of needle pricks. Nights Lucy cooked and mended. She minded the children, especially Mike, bathed them and put them to bed. Sunday she washed clothes. "There's no room in Lucy's life for joy," Jess wrote the preacher. He was right. There wasn't. "I don't know how long she can bear this burden," Jess wrote from his cell where there was no work to do. Then Lucy's crippled boy, Mike, died. It was after that Lucy began turning to paper. At first she took headaches and sat holding her head, not looking up all day. She stopped writing letters to Jess. She stopped attending the schoolhouse church. When asked why, she cried out, "Sweet Jesus, I'm turning to paper." After 3 years of working at the pants and shirt factory, she didn't show up at the job. "I will not be able to sew any more hymns," she said finally. "Sweet Jesus, I'm turning to paper." She had to stop washing the children and clothes because her hands couldn't stand to touch water or peel potatoes or bake bread. "I burn very easy now," she explained. True, the sound of her hands rubbing together was brittle and raspy. The Lucy Kinney that had been stout and happy-go-lucky and glossy-skinned no more resembled this Lucy than a persimmon does a pomegranate. The children were taken away and placed in foster homes. Lucy rolled up on the floor because she was paper. When folks came in, she got up and lay rolled up on the table because it was neater. Not being able to hold an axe to cut wood with her paper hands, she near froze to death. The neighbors found her. When the neighbors did cut her wood, Lucy couldn't fetch it because of her paper arms being so frail. When they fetched the wood, Lucy still couldn't light the fire, she said, because of her paper fingers catching fire. She was thinner now than anyone thought possible, and almost transparent. The disease quickened. A doctor came with 3 men from the state hospital, although one could have carried Lucy easily. They took Lucy off, wrapped in a white binding cloth, and that is the story of the woman who turned paper. Some said it wouldn't have happened if Jess hadn't been sent to the penitentiary and left Lucy with all that trouble, which is certainly a good argument for the owning of a milk cow and garden patch or having a job of work. Sod Miller's Money. There was a time when Sod Miller was young. He had a full head of hair and stood firm and strong as a stalk of green corn in a good year. He was likable, even handsome in those days. One girl thought so. Nancy Vickers had warm, friendly ways, a flashing smile, and 2 brown braids. Nancy and Sod began being seen together at Saturday night preachings and hand in hand at Sunday picnics. They soon began courting in earnest and were married. Friends chiveried them, ringing cowboy bells and banging tin cans. The bright June night was filled with fiddle music. Young folks dancing barefoot in the grass, hooting and howling outside their windows all night long, which plainly proved everyone considered Sod and Nancy to be a good match and expected the marriage would last as long as life. But because of the change in Sod, this proved as wrong as could be. At the beginning, the Millers seemed happy. They settled down on a hilly farm place Sod's pa had left him. Then came the change. There was quite a bit of debate about the cause. Kindly folks laid the blame on the real hot, long-lasting fever Sod suffered through when he came down with the German measles. They said the fever burned out the reasoning part of his brain. For days he raved and ranted in delirium, and not one word he said could be understood. Neighbors came to help like they always do. They sat up with Sod nights, bathing the heat away with cloths dipped in a basin of icy water, rushing up every few minutes fresh from the spring. Mother Bill knew different. She said 'twasn't the fever at all caused Sod to turn mean, and that Sod's worse than ordinary stinginess was inherited. I was raised up by a part of his family over at Kingdom Ford, she said. His grandpa was the same way. Which of these opinions was right really didn't matter. What happened afterwards did. First thing he got up out of bed, Sod's hair all fell out. A woman could live with that, Nancy said. A bald head never hurt anybody, but what he did afterwards hurt plenty. His actions near killed Nancy and the girls because Sod wasn't ordinary stingy. Sod's stinginess progressed from not allowing Nancy pennies to buy a stamp to write her mama and papa, or to buy little Louisa and Annie a penny sucker, to worse things. The time came when he wouldn't buy food for Nancy and the girls, said he couldn't see his money go down anyone's throat. Nancy and the girls about starved. Neighbors themselves, poor, bless their good hearts, carried over meals and gave what clothes they could for the girls. When time, tears, and gentle persuasion could not change Sod, Nancy finally gave up. She took the girls and left. Nancy found a job in the next county cleaning and washing up clothes in a small hotel. At least the little girls had food to eat. Next to leave Sod was a skinny old horse, Gertrude. Never being fed, she tramped down the already leaning fence and wandered off. The Hal Jumer likewise deserted, skin and bones, and while he could still make it, he ran off to the neighbors across the ridge. They had a 2-room cabin overrun with playful kids and a dozen friendly dogs. Even the scrawny chickens disappeared from Sod Miller's yard. Whether eaten by a fox or by Sod, no one knew. Sod himself was seldom seen. One reason was he moved from the house into a log shed in a distant woodsy corner of the farm back off the road. Folks said he lived off a vegetable patch and the goods of the woods. One thing sure, Old Man Band, the storekeeper, said Sod spent no money on store-bought items. If Sod ever changed his aging bib overalls or took a bath in the cheerful creek which tumbled past his shed, no one would have known it from walking downwind of him. And as for his beard, if the hair on his head had vanished, the hair on his chin made up for it. Sod's beard grew down to his waist. When Sod did not come out of the woods, he appeared out of the shadows like a suspicious woodchuck. He came quietly, his eyes sliding back and forth, getting the lay of the land. He would cover the distance between the shelter of the trees and the back door of Band's store at a trot. Entering, he would peer into the store proper as if he were a wanted man. Sod made money, everyone noticed. He fetched mushrooms in season. He carried up dry mint and roots, whole nuts, wild red plums, grapes, wild cherries, and crab apples. He's made a mint of money off the woods, the storekeeper said, and ain't spent a penny of it in the 5-10 years since Nancy and the girls left. What's he doing with his money? Folks speculated on where all the cash was saved. Nobody had any sensible ideas about it, but stories got around anyway. People began to be watchful. 2 adventurous lads slipped up to Sod's shed at night to peek in the windows. Didn't do any good. Sod was not a man to spend money on coal oil for a lamp. The shed was dark as the woods. This story and others were repeated because back in the country there wasn't much to talk about. People didn't take the papers or have radios. Sod wouldn't give you the time of day, they said. He wouldn't give you a nod of the head. They were right, he wouldn't. So everybody, being obliging, left Sod to himself, which was exactly what he wanted in the first place. July brought on the blackberry season. Sod showed up with heaping buckets on a Wednesday and a Thursday. He'll be in again Friday, Old Man Band said. Taking in a right smart amount of money again this year, he has. You can count on Sod. He'll be again tomorrow.
Robbing the birds he is, picking every berry in the woods. Friday came, and Sod Miller didn't show up with his buckets of blackberries. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and still he didn't come in. Something's wrong, or he'd have come in with the berries and collected the money, Old Man Band said. They talked about it, and the men in the store, and called in a deputy from St. James. Sod Miller's turned up missin', Old Man Band exclaimed. That is, he hasn't turned up. Some of us fellers better go see, the deputy said. 2 cars of men drove as close as they could get to the log shed. They walked through brush the rest of the way. The place was dead quiet, from the old socks on the floor to the sparrows on the roof. He's definitely missing, the deputy said. The last thing he's been doing was picking berries, Sam Best declared. The biggest berry patch in this part of the county is on the old Spock's place over on Bindle's Road. That's where they found Sod's tracks. There's a path tramped through the briars. They found 2 full buckets of berries several days old, and they found something else, not very pleasant. Long ago a house had been there. Alongside the house was an old well hole overgrown with vines. The rotted boards over the top were tipped inward where they had given way. Sod had walked smack into the deep well. They went for a stout rope, and somebody with strong stomach fetched Sod up. They found out then where Sod kept his money. On himself. There was about 35 pounds of silver dollars and changes and bundles of bills sewed in his old clothes in layers. The deputy said if Sod hadn't been weighed down like that, he might have saved himself. It wasn't very appetizing seeing Sod like that, especially for those used to know when he was a lad. The deputy said everybody had to go sometime, and he guessed this was Sod's particular way. The story had a happy ending, though, for Nancy and the girls. They came back to the old place, fixed up the farm with the money found on Sod, and lived as happy ever after as people are able to in this world. Print on the window. Houses, Mama said, sometimes reflect the lives of people who have lived in them, so Mama was always alert when moving into a house. This one was in much better shape than most of the houses Papa found to move in the family into. Mama didn't note anything amiss with the house until Becky went to wash the windows. First, Becky had washed the high, narrow windows of the living room. Here the air was sweet, and the scent of pink roses climbing roofward. Then, with the vinegar water and a clean rag and a piece of dry paper to polish the finished job, she rounded the house. She began washing the windows of the big bedroom. This was where Becky, then Mama, found there was something sinister about. The window of the bedroom wouldn't wash clean. Becky, taught so by Mama, went through the whole scrubbing process a second time. "Mama," Becky called, "this window won't wash clean." At first, Mama called for Becky to use more elbow grease. 10 minutes later, Becky came round the house to where Mama was giving the front porch a good cleaning and scrubbing. "It's no use, Mama," she said. "There's some black stains and the glass won't come out." Mama went to see for herself. She studied the deep marks which seemed seared into the glass itself. "Leave this window be," she said, and went off to talk to Papa. Together they examined the markings in the glass. The next day, Mama went off to talk to the folks who lived up on the next hills. She came home and went straight to Papa. "I found out about the marks on the window. You can't see together they make the shape of a cloven hoof. The devil came for the last man who died in that room." The children shivered and huddled together. "He was a wicked man," Mama went on, "cruel so that at last his wife and children were driven away from him. He died with an awful, frightful screaming, begging the neighbors who came running not to let the devil in the window. They slammed the window shut as he screamed, but I guess he can't keep the devil out when he's a mind to enter. The men died late that night. Ever since, the print of a hoof has been burned into the glass of that window. But don't worry," she said to the little ones as they gathered round. "The devil don't worry children nor bother good folks." So they stayed in that house and never did. The Haunted Well. In the back hills of Pike County, strangers were seldom seen in those days. Thus, one bright day, when a truck loaded with goods and children drove up and ground to a stop in front of the store, necks craned. And when the driver, a man named Dapple, announced in a booming voice he had brought his family to stay, jaws dropped open. "Where are you planning to stay in these parts?" Bill Brandt, the storekeeper, asked. When Dapple announced he planned to spend the summer on the Belden place, Bill Brandt reared back as if he had been suddenly struck in the face. There was a group intake of breath among the other men and an emotional reshuffling of feet. You would have thought then and there somebody would have said something about the haunted well, but there are happenings too painful to talk about. There are some things people have to find out for themselves. Besides, the haunted well was a closed subject as far as Bill Brandt and the other hill folks were concerned. There wasn't man or boy would go near the Belden place after dark, not willingly in daylight. The frame that had once supported a strong-built house had fallen in upon itself. The rough, humped shape of the remaining walls was rounded off and buried in woodbine so that the whole resembled a green, hunched toad. Right through where the kitchen used to be grew a sizable oak, and tall, compact evergreens formed such a perfect protective circle about the place that you knew they were man-planted. The Belden tragedy had happened maybe 40 years before, but the terrors of the well remained as potent as when it happened. Everyone sat quiet until the Dapples drove off. Then the whispering began like the buzzing of June bees. It was the worst luck in the world just to go walking near the well in the daylight, and as for night, the cries of the girls could still be clearly heard. A few claimed the eerie sounds were only the lonely calling of night birds, but everyone noted the scoffers never stayed to find out. Sam and Maud Belden had raised their 2 daughters to young womanhood back there. Marilee and Sylvia were said to be good-looking girls. Not many people had seen them, though. Sam, a hard, unfriendly man, had very strict rules for his wife and daughters to live by, and gallivanting wasn't one of them. The trouble began, striking like a thunderbolt, on a gray March morning. Marilee Belden, the younger daughter, staggered out into the main road alongside the store, screaming. Her clothes were all torn, muddy, and blood-stained. Her dark eyes were vacant and wild. "Help, Sylvia! Help my sister!" the girl cried over and over again as folks from the storm came a-running. She was carried into the Brants' little house and put to bed by Bill's wife, Jean. Bill and half a dozen men got together. Carrying guns, they headed through the timber for the Belden place. At the house they found furniture in splinters, beds torn apart, tables and chairs were overturned, and the dishes smashed. Blood was splattered everywhere on the floors and ceilings in every room. There was no one to be seen. Back at the Brants, Marilee came awake with Jean bending over her. "What happened to you?" Jean gasped. "Who done this to you?" The girl began to sob and to talk all in the same quick breath. Shivering, she gripped Jean's hand with such strength they went numb, and in a hysterical torrent of the words managed to tell her story. Sam Belden had come upon Sylvia, the older girl, cutting her long hair. He went mad with rage. No daughter of his, he shouted, would live to disgrace him with her hair cut off like a slut, like a fallen woman. He raved at his daughter. He swore he would kill her and took up a stick of wood and began to beat her. But Sylvia's temper was bad, too, as bad and mean and fierce as her father's. She took up a poker from the fire and fought back. The 2 of them rushed wildly from room to room, screaming and beating at each other. At last, in the kitchen, Sam struck her down. Sylvia looked to be dead, and her father began dragging her out the door. Maud had come running when she heard Sylvia's screams. Now she broke in, trying to save her. She pleaded with Sam to leave Sylvia be. He wouldn't listen. Maud fought him. Marilee sprang to help, and together they tore Sylvia away from him. Then Sam ran for the woodpile. He came back waving the axe, shouting and cursing. He struck Maud down with it, murdered her as Marilee looked on, murdered her in cold blood. Then he began dragging Maud and Sylvia by turns towards the well. Marilee followed. She fell on her knees, praying, staining her skirts in blood, begging Sam to have mercy. But he didn't listen. He didn't hear. He only dragged the 2 bodies across the yard, through the leaves and dirt, toward the well. He threw Maud in first. Marilee heard the sickening splash of her mother's body striking the water and would never stop hearing it. When Sam lifted Sylvia high, trying to do the same with her, Marilee grabbed up the poker and sprang at him, beating him back. Sylvia slid from his grasp, collapsing half in and half out of the well. She gasped. Her eyes opened, and she began to cry out. She clawed at the rim of the well, trying to save herself, but Sam got the poker away from Marilee and struck Sylvia's grasping fingers. She screamed long and piercing one last time and dropped into the water. And so Marilee ran for the axe. She had to. She struck Sam so hard with it that he was knocked off balance and into the well. Like Sylvia, he tried to cling to the rim. Marilee let the axe fall again and cut off his fingers. Sam was a strong, stubborn man, and he hung on with the stumps of his bleeding hands. He shouted he'd kill Marilee too. He managed to get one leg over the edge of the well, and Marilee knew she had no choice. She struck him in the face with the sharp blade of the axe with all her might. Slowly then, what was left of his bloody hands slipped off the edge of the well. Marilee ran away, with Sam's last cries echoing through the timber. Her whole family in the well, dead. Jean Brant sat listening to all this in stunned silence. Horrified, she tried to put together the bits and pieces of the grisly story she had just heard. Many times in that awful hour she had wanted to cover her ears and rush from the room, but Marilee's white-knuckled grip and Jean's own compassionate heart held her captive with equal force. She was the only one to listen, to give what crumb of comfort she could. Only when she heard the men returning did Jean pull loose from Marilee's tight hold and settle her gently under the covers. She went to meet the men. "We sent Lester Gast off for the law," Bill Brandt told his wife. His face was ashen. "Did the girl tell you what happened?" Jean stood quiet a moment, then tucking her hands under her arms to stop their shaking, she told the nightmarish tale as best she could. "When I heard she'd comin' back, I put her down to sleep. She's alone in back. Alone." Of a sudden, filled with foreboding, Jean cried out. The men lumbered after her. She ran into the bedroom. The window was open when they got there, the curtain blowing, the bed empty. Marilee had gone. It didn't take them long to track the girl back to the Belden house. They could see her skirts ballooning above the water of the well. It was a terrible sight. All those scratch marks on the well rim, the clawed marks were deep even in the brick, and chunks were torn from the wood. The axe blows had left their marks, too. The well area and the water itself was red with blood. No one could go near there ever again. The four Beldens have long rested in a quiet graveyard close by, but the story of the well remains as terrifying as ever. What happened to the city family, the Dapples, that went so innocently to stay back there? Nobody rightly knows. Folks only know that 3 days later the Dapples came driving out of the timber fast, never stopping. They headed towards the city and were never heard of again. That's the only people ever tried to live on the Belden place. A few years back, though, the best thing that ever could happen to that property. The United States government bought it up as part of a conservation area, burned down the house they did, and filled up the well. One of the fresh-faced young forest rangers came by the general store one summer not long ago. What he said was, "Sure have a fearful number of birds calling and crying in the woods back there." Nobody said anything, but Jean Brandt, coming to 70 years old, went into the back of the store with tears streaming down her cheeks. You can fill up old wells and you can burn down old houses, but the ghosts of the Belden girls are with us still, screaming. The Special Gift. This is the story of Ruby White and how she got mixed up in the complete and absolute disappearance of Vinnie Matthew. Ruby White's shield was a flowered apron. Her only outside excursions were doing the weekly shopping in nearby Pay Falls. Sunday she attended church within a mile of the farm. Besides being a good woman, Ruby White was a woman good for something. She minded county-supported foster children with warmth and affection. One of these dependent children was Vinnie Matthew. Had Ruby known of Vinnie's special gift, would she have taken her in? Probably so. Ruby's heart was as big as a harbor. Mrs. Watts worked for the county. One of Mrs. Watts' duties was to find clean, suitable, and loving, if possible, homes to take in foster children. Many a time Mrs. Watts wished she knew half a dozen Ruby Whites. One day, middle of the morning, trailed by a waif of a child, Mrs. Watts knocked at the door of Ruby's screened-in porch. When there was no answer, she knew where to go. She set Vinny's canvas bag of county purchase clothing on the porch and headed for the garden. The time was early June, and Ruby had filled a large dishpan with green onions, fresh leaf lettuce, round red radishes. With a sharp, narrow hoe, she was giving one last turn to the loose soil round the maturing tomato plants. To have the first ripe tomatoes of the summer was a matter of pride to gardeners of the Bay Falls area. So the first Ruby saw of Vinnie Matthew was a pair of brown eyes peering through the wooden slats of the garden gate. Vinnie stared steadily past Ruby, past the garden, past the pasture, and on beyond. The two women chatted. "The child's had a rocky time of it for a 7-year-old," Mrs. Watts said. Ruby already knew Vinnie's mother was dead. Her father suffered from an incurable disease and was in a veterans' hospital. "Come, child," Ruby said, taking Vinnie's small hand. Under the other arm she managed the greens. In the kitchen, Ruby set out a plate of pecan chewies. Mrs. Watts had coffee. Vinnie, uninterested, stood at the table turning her glass of milk round in a series of damp circles. "She's not given to eating much," Mrs. Watts said of her. Vinnie's eyes would brighten later, though, when Ruby showed her the light, airy room which was to be hers. She would lay an affectionate, tentative hand on the robin's egg blue bread-spread. "I'll fatten her up," Ruby promised. She scooped up both of Vinnie's delicate hands in her open-hearted way. "Now here," she said, numbering Vinnie's thin fingers one at a time, "all the hands of a cake icer and a cookie taster if I ever saw two." A very nice child. Frank Wyatt agreed with his wife. "Good," he boomed after supper that night. "Quiet. You wouldn't know the youngster was around." "No trouble at all," was the way he described Vinnie to the neighbors. "If you couldn't get along with Vinnie, you couldn't get along with anyone," Ruby said. She was right. Peace and calm reigned in the household until the day Ruby White got the shock of her life. Vinnie came in from playing out in the pasture. Standing on the screened-in porch, she looked at Ruby a long, long time. The child's little hands were folded over each other across her middle. "Your little brother Kenny's having fun feeding the chickens," she said after a time. Ruby's fingers went limp. The cup in her hand tilted. A brown coffee stain oozed over the red and white checkered tablecloth. She turned all the way around slowly, her healthy face pasty, and faced Vinnie directly. Kenny had been dead more than 30 years. "You've been at the neighbors," Ruby's voice raised, splitting. "You should have asked me before going." A kindness in her voice softened the words. "They have 2 boys named of Kenny and Charles. The boys feed the chickens over there. You've seen those boys." Vinnie wagged her head in a vigorous denial so that her brains lashed. "I seen your Kenny, your little brother. He said he used to live here. He was feeding the chickens. He said I could go away with him afterwards." When Ruby could get out of the word, she said, What did he look like?" Vinnie measured a hand across her forehead. "He had bangs like this, and he wore thick glasses." Thick glasses. Ruby's thoughts plunged back in time to an image of a skinny boy wearing glasses. One of her little brother's eyes was crossed. Vinnie came on into the kitchen and washed her hands. Ruby's numb ears heard the merry splashing of water. "Time to set the table for supper," Vinnie said, heading for the cupboard. She took out 3 plates, counting as she did so. 1, 2, 3. With care she selected 3 knives, forks, and spoons from the drawer. "The knife and the spoon going on the right of the plate," she flicked a glance at Ruby. "The forks go on the left." Ruby nodded, coming out of a fog of bygone years. "What color were the chickens?" she asked. "White." Vinnie arranged the plates just so. "This is my left hand," she said aloud. She laid a fork down alone. "This is my right hand." She laid the knife and spoon together. "Mama always kept white leghorns for laying," Ruby said to no one in particular. "Mama wouldn't have any other breed for laying." She moved towards the out-of-doors. "Show me where you seen Kenny." Vinnie looked at the incomplete table. "Finish later," Ruby said. Vinnie led the way. Ruby followed with a hollow, waiting feeling. They crossed the yard, passed the barn, and came to a stop just beyond 3 aged oaks. "There!" Vinny pointed with conviction to an empty plot of grass. The chicken house was there. I went inside. Kenny was throwing corn to the chickens. The back pasture was quiet, but Ruby's emotions were seething. Who but herself could have known? In this exact spot the chicken house had stood. She and Frank had bought the farm from Dad more than 10 years ago. The log chicken house had been torn down right after the new barn was built. In silence, the two returned to the kitchen. Venny resumed her task of setting the table. Ruby had already decided she would say nothing to Frank. Ruby considered the belief that the spirits of departed persons sometimes, under certain circumstances, presented themselves to the side of the living. This belief had existed in all ages among all people. Yes, many people believed there were conditions under which these spectral appearances occurred. Ruby herself had read with astonishment of a man named M. Nicolau, a bookseller in Berlin. For some part of his life, here she glanced at Vinny, he had seen many spectral persons. These transparent persons had spoken and talked with M. Nicolau. But Frank believed none of these things. She wouldn't mention Kenny and the chicken house to Frank. In the days followed, Vinny went outside, afternoons, to play. Ruby had asked her not to play back of the barn any more, this disturbing child. "I'm going to the Masons," Vinny told Ruby one afternoon. "I went there yesterday and the day before." The Masons? A new family in the neighborhood? Ruby couldn't recall the name. With Vinny so shy, Ruby considered it a good omen, that she had made new friends. It would be a wholesome influence for the strange child to play with other children. Ruby tied her dog braids with a bright red ribbon. "Be home in an hour or so," Ruby said. "Have a good time. Mind your manners." But that evening on the front porch, when Ruby mentioned the new family, Frank said the name of the new family was Williams, not Mason. They had a grown daughter who lived away from home. "I suppose there could be two families," Ruby said quickly. "Or," Frank laughed, "Vinny has a powerful imagination." With uneasy hands, Ruby smoothed her apron. The next afternoon, when Vinny asked to go play with the Masons, Ruby did something she had never done before. Untying her apron, she trailed Vinny down the road, keeping out of sight. She became certain of her eerie suspicions when the child turned off the main road. Vinny walked quickly, gaily down the unused lane. At the end of the lane there stood a grove of gnarled, twisted cedars. Ruby knew what stood behind the trees, a huge, broken old house which had been a grand home called the Cedars. Rushing after Vinny, Ruby was in time to see her knock at the door, wait a minute, and walk in as if in answer to an invitation. The child heard voices where others didn't. Ruby turned away, shaken. She must find out the name of the children who had lived at the Cedars long ago. She would stop to talk to Matilda Harris. Matilda was 90 and proud of it. Ruby spoke to the spry old woman of other matters first, of her health, of the crops, and of the weather. Then she said, "What was the name of the family that owned the Cedars long ago?" Matilda poured boiling water over the black, crisp tea leaves from China. "The Masons," she answered in her scant-aged voice. "You were just a wee tot when the last Mason died." "Were there children? Do you remember their names?" Ruby watched the pale steam rise from her thick cup. "3 children." Matilda paused, looking inward. Caught up in her own reflections, her faded eyes did not catch the expression on Ruby's face. "Edward there was, and Sadie. You don't hear a girl's name of Sadie any more. There was a smaller girl. I don't recall her name. All dead and gone." Dead, Ruby thought in a kind of daze, but not gone for some. She gulped the hot tea and hurried home. She wouldn't say anything to Frank, nor anyone. People would think she was losing her mind. After a while, Vinny came hopping and skipping home, her cheeks pink. Ruby didn't ask questions right away. She was thinking of a newspaper article she read about a woman who lived in Australia. The woman, the newspaper said, had a special gift. She could tell when anyone was going to die. Ruby shuddered. To see death hovering, the woman had at last taken her own life to escape the visions. A special gift. Vinny had one too. They must talk. So Ruby took Vinny for a walk, out past the barn, past the 3 Asian oaks, past the chicken house that wasn't there anymore, where Kenny could still have fun feeding the chickens for some to see. They talked by the slumbering pond. "What are the names of the Mason children you play with?" Ruby asked. Vinny wound 3 blades of green grass into a tender rope. "Edward," she said, "Sadie, and the little one is Elizabeth." These words made Ruby certain of Vinny's special gift. She told Vinny so. She talked to Vinny of this uncanny ability, this knack for seeing folks who had died and left this world. The child was fascinated. She gazed into Ruby's serious eyes with wonder and astonishment. Then, for a time, the little girl was silent, staring off into space. Her look dreamy. Ruby would have given anything to know what she was thinking. This gift was an awesome responsibility for the knower as well as for the gifted. When Vinny looked at her again, Ruby felt uncomfortable and confused. "They are dead, and I can be with them?" Vinny asked. Ruby nodded, wordless. "Edward and Sadie and Elizabeth and your Kenny?" Ruby kept nodding. "I could have stayed with them. They asked me to." Ruby felt an icy chill. "They had 2 dogs." Vinny's bright face blossomed like an opening flower. Dogs, too. Ruby sat stunned. The glow of the child's delicate face seemed unearthly, and Ruby felt an awareness, a sensitivity she had never known before. The newness and the realization of it passed clear through her. "You miss your mother very much," Ruby spoke slowly, lest her voice tremble, and drawing the little girl to her, she wiped away the quick tears that came. Later the two, the plain, kind-hearted woman and the unusual little girl, stayed close, working in the kitchen together and clearing up afterwards. Now and then they exchanged warm glances as friends will. That night at bedtime something else happened. Instead of saying good night to Ruby, Vinny said goodbye. Ruby stood over her bed, folding the robin eggs blue bedspread the child had always admired. "Goodbye, Vinny," Ruby answered tenderly. Their eyes met. A current of understanding flowed between them. The next morning, Vinny Matthew had completely and utterly disappeared. She was traced along the highway. A little girl alone is always remembered. The whole long way to the rooms in Bay Falls, where she and her mother had lived. They found her tracks in the dusty, now empty room she and her mother had shared in happy days together. The track stopped right in the center of the room. It was unexplainable to all but Ruby. Of course, none of the searchers knew of Vinny's special gift, and Ruby didn't tell them. Vinny was happy now. She'd gone back, found her mother, and gone away with her to wherever the good dead go. No, Ruby never said a word to anyone about Vinny's Matthew's special gift. But she knew. She knew. Bring back my teeth. Granny Creel lived some 2 miles by path through the woods from Axel Brooks and his wife Pearlie. With Granny lived her 37-year-old, 6'6" grandson, Liddy. Liddy and Granny had no modern conveniences. Granny had a quick, water-saving way of doing the dishes. Spot, her little black and white dog, licked them clean, and Granny gave them a brisk wipe with the off corner of her all-purpose apron. Granny's dishes never felt a drop of water from one year to the next, but then neither did her lanky grandson Liddy. Liddy considered work and body washing, if he considered them at all, the earthly burden of school teachers and church preachers. In earlier days, Granny Creel had a spring below her cabin. A flood coming along 20 years before had swept it shut with rocks and brush. Liddy might have dug it out. He often spoke of it, but he never got around to actually digging. Settin' was better suited to his likes than shovelin' would ever be, he explained, and he never did dig out the spring. And so Granny Creel carried the bucket the 2 miles back and forth to the spring at Axel and Pearlie Brooks. Liddy might have done this too. He often spoke of it, but he was never seen with a bucket. He explained with a manly shake of the head that shooting squirrels was more to his liking. It came about through a county agency that Granny Creel was given a pair of glossy false teeth. These bright teeth were far and away the finest worldly treasure Granny had ever owned or hoped to. The teeth went everywhere. Granny visited around the mountain, not in her mouth, but in an ancient handbag as weather-stained as an old sail. From out of its dark, mysterious depths she drew forth the teeth to be exclaimed over and admired. Came a day Granny Creel died and was buried. Her granddaughter, Liddy's sister, came to the cabin. She claimed and carried off Granny's few personal possessions, a half-dozen twists of Granny Gray's hair, her worn Bible, and the old handbag. Now Liddy slept in the attic space over the main room of the cabin where Granny's bed stood. The second night after Granny's burial, Liddy was startled awake. Something was stirring downstairs, trembling, bent double. He cast a timid glance below. What he saw set him to wishing he had slept out of doors with a wind for a curtain. It was Granny Krill come back. A fog-like Granny fluttering about the room, muttering and murmuring, hunting for something. Liddy lit out for Axel Brooks' house. His pace would have won him the world championship had anyone been in the dark, gloomy woods to clock him. Every cracking twig underfoot seemed to Liddy the thunder of the Lord sounding in his sensitive ears. Axel Brooks heard his kitchen door burst open and slam shut. He came bounding out in his nightshirt, quite astonished to find Liddy had come to call in that same flappy garment. "What's the matter, son?" Axel cried. "You look as if you seen a ghost." Liddy opened and closed his mouth. His chest heaved. When he could, he said, "Granny's come back. A ghost." He spoke with moist eyes and a tone of great anxiety. "There is a misty light glowing all round her." He wiped the cold sweat of terror from his brow with a rag dangling from the wood box to dry. Pearlie appeared, framed in the doorway. "Granny, are you a ghost? Son, whatever ghosts are, and no one knows for sure, they are real. They come to the living for a purpose." Liddy moaned and ate from a pan of warm cornbread at the back of the stove. "Bed here until morning, son," Axel said kindly. "Tomorrow go home. Wait. When Granny comes again, find out what she wants." "Folks' ghosts keep coming back until they are satisfied," Pearlie added. Liddy finished off the cornbread, moaning pitifully between bites, wound himself up in a quilt, and slept before the kitchen stove. The next night, Liddy, shaken from head to foot, lay near the opening in Granny's attic, chewing his nails and tugging his hair. Sure enough, Granny's frail shape materialized about midnight. She looked into the cupboard. She looked on the table. She searched the bed. Liddy, his eyes near popping, could see the plank floor right through Granny. She was that hazy. He listened to her mumbling, but couldn't make out a word from where he lay hidden. There's nothing for it but he must climb down the ladder. He must go down into the main room with Granny turned ghost. Although he did just that, his icy feet scarcely feeling the rungs, he was never to be quite the same Liddy again. He would spend a lot of time afterwards avoiding dark, lonely places, looking around corners before he turned them, and always looking before he leaped, which he didn't often. The second his bare feet touched the floor, Granny spied him. Enveloping him in an icy wind, she cried out, "Bring back my teeth! Bring back my teeth!" With long, anxious strides, Liddy again made it to the neighbors in his nightshirt. He was pale at the inside of a good cucumber and near speechless, but Axel and his wife Pearlie finally got it out of him what Granny Krill was after. "She said, 'Bring back my teeth! Bring back my teeth!'" Liddy gasped out, his hair quite a bit wider than it had been the day before. "There'll be no rest for you until you do," Pearlie Brooks cried, her eyes bulging. "You know, Liddy, son, your Granny Krill was over fond of those store teeth." Liddy reckoned this was true, and the bringing back of the teeth was not to be put off like the digging of a spring and day-to-day chores. So the first streaks of daylight found him on the road to his sister's house. By nightfall he was back, clutching the handbag containing Granny's glossy white store teeth. Pleasing Granny's ghost was as simple as that. Came midnight, a wispy Granny appeared as before. Axel and Liddy, for Liddy refused to go it alone, after all he was only 37 and never been wed, watched from cracks in the attic floor. Granny laid a lighter-than-air hand upon the black handbag. With a glad cry of delight she drew forth the precious teeth. Clutching them to her breast, she dissolved. Liddy, much relieved, settled down to live out his time in the same leisurely fashion as before. When last heard of, he was still doing the dishes in the same waterless fashion as before, except for a new dog named Spot, the other Spot having some time since died of old age. Now and then Liddy stops in for a kind word from Axel and Pearlie as he fetches a bucket of water from their spring, chomping away at the last cornbread in the pan. He allows that some day, when he comes by a shovel, he may dig out the spring below his cabin, if he ever catches up on his squirrel hunting. The Lovers. The house stood alone, feared and shunned. New and past stories of ghostly sightings were whispered. It was a place where lovers brave enough could meet undisturbed. Jesse and Alex were such lovers. That's how they came to be there, standing over the grave of Charlie Fitzgerald, kissin'. Spike grass stabbed the June twilight. Dainty Queen Anne's lace looked up, white-faced. Thorny catbrier twisted every which way, as if to tear out its roots and flee. "What if Charlie's ghost should walk tonight?" Jessie whispered. "Ghosts aren't only transparent people, after all," Alex whispered back. "He couldn't hurt us." Sly peepers sang to them from among the coiled fern. A stone angel leaned forward, attending. The lovers laughed softly together. Charlie's headstone, a pocked, weather and time-faded humble gray stone, shrank among the weeds. Jessie, pressing back her gleaming hair, read aloud. Charlie Fitzgerald, born June 10th, 1863, died 1882. He was 19 years old, our age. June 10th. Today is Charlie's birthday, Alex. Strange we should come here tonight of all nights. Jessie, broad eyes, sought Alex in the near dark. If you and I could just give Charlie something for his birthday, the lovers touched. What can you give a fellow who's been dead almost 50 years? Alex smiled into the face he could barely see in the dim light. Tell me about Charlie, Jessie whispered. It was your family buried him so long ago. And Charlie's been walking ever since, Alex said ruefully. He pointed to a set of matching ruts leading off into the brush. Charlie came down that lane a long time ago, a stranger, an orphan, late on a summer day. I imagine I see him swinging along there, Jessie murmured. Charlie was kind to the animals, a hard field worker. Our family let him stay. He came out of nowhere, a ghost even then, Jessie said. To understand Charlie's story, you must picture the farm, busy the way it was in those days. I will, Jessie promised. I hear chickens clucking. I hear the tramp of horses' hooves in the stable. I see the farm dogs running to meet Charlie. Their tails are wagging. Dogs know a kind heart when they meet one. The lovers gave the June night a moment's silence before Alex continued. Every free minute, Grandmother said, Charlie worked in the flower garden among the flowers. There's still flowers in Charlie's garden, Jessie exclaimed. I noticed as we came, orange daylilies gone wild, pansies, ox-eyed daisies. The lovers left the weedy cemetery. They walked closed arm in arm up the steps of the old leaning house. In the gathering dark, they crossed the creaking boards of the wide, once-railed porch. Holding hands, the lovers tiptoed up the stairs, seeking the quietest of spots. No sooner had they found it and settled joyously in each other's arms than they heard him coming. Charlie! They cried out his name in the same breath. His footsteps on the stairs were quick and young and firm. Go away, Charlie! Jessie hid her face in the cotton of Alex's shirt. The footsteps entered the room. Gently, Alex pushed Jessie from him. I'll lead him downstairs. He'll go with me to the garden. He loved the flowers that grew there because the flowers made his sweetheart happy. Grandmother said so a dozen times. You're not going to leave me alone, Jessie cried. Only to lead Charlie away. Alex went out the door. His living footfalls boomed on the stairs. He was back in 5 minutes, but the ghost of Charlie had not left the room. Charlie had stayed at Jessie's side. The lovers stood shivering and very close. 3 was a fearful crowd. They sensed the stirring of Charlie's hands and the restless movements of his feet. Something is troubling Charlie tonight, Alex said very low. Let's lead him downstairs together. Jessie looked fearfully over her shoulder where Charlie's quick steps sounded. Happy birthday, Charlie, she said. Happy birthday. Her voice shook. Outside in the night they walked the length of the gloomy farmhouse. They stopped, breathing deeply in a patch of weed. Charlie waited nearby, invisible but present. This room alone back here, Alex stood a solid, real figure beside Jessie, is where Charlie's sweetheart died. They loved each other, same as you and me. Jessie leaned forward. She peered into the room beyond the door Alex held ajar. The room lived, filled with moon-grown shadow shapes. Jessie drew back quickly. For an instant I thought I saw a girl's face. What was her name? What became of her? Ellie, I think it was. Charlie brought flowers from this garden for Ellie. He must have passed them to her through this window. Alex laid a hand on a rough opening in the wall. His voice went even softer. Ellie was dying of tuberculosis. They couldn't let her live with the family. Lots of these old houses have an extra room attached. That's what they were used for. Families did what they had to protect the other members. Alex put a protective arm around Jesse's slim waist. Charlie sat beneath this very window long ago. He played the mouth harp for Ellie evenings. Then Ellie died. Jesse caught up on the sad story. She was buried in the family cemetery out there. Alex shook his head in the darkness. Ellie was never buried. Never buried? Jesse's tone was shocked, frightened. Her family couldn't bring themselves to put Ellie in the ground. She was a beautiful girl, gifted, their youngest child. Yes, Jessie could barely be heard, for Charlie's ghostly presence still could be felt at her back, cold and with the lightest of touches. The family was well-to-do. They had Ellie cremated. She's still in the house, grandmother said. When Charlie died the week after, people hardly noticed. They grieved so for Ellie, and after all, Charlie was only a hired hand and an orphan. And today is Charlie's birthday. I could cry for him now, Jessie said. I suppose, being an orphan, Charlie never had a birthday present in his life. They said he caught the fever, but grandmother said Charlie died of a broken heart after Ellie was taken from this back room and turned to ashes. Jessie gripped Alex's hand tight. Ellie may have been the only person who loved Charlie in his whole lonely life. You can understand the power of love. When Charlie no longer had love, he died. She shivered in spite of the warmth of the summer night. Something has happened to me, Alex. I feel Charlie at my side. I smell fresh-cut flowers. Jessie pulled her hand loose from Alex's. We must go find Ellie, she cried out sharply. She began to run along the empty length of the old house. We must release Ellie from the house. We must. Alex caught up with her. It was he led the way up the stairs. They paused on the second floor, then brushed through a curtain of cobwebs and climbed to the third-floor attic. From a crumbling chimney corner, Alex drew forth a greeny, moldering stone jar. Ellie's ashes, he whispered, holding the jar carefully as one would a holy relic. The first time you've been touched since they were placed here so long ago. Are we doing right? Jessie didn't hear the question. She stood tense and still, waiting for a message, a sign she could not name until it came. Most tenderly she took the girl's ashes and held them to her breast. Then came the crash. The house shook beneath their feet. The sign. An icy wind wound round them from below, chilling each to the bone. They sped from the attic, past the second floor and down the stairs. A gray and choking dust swirled up to meet them. It was as if the entire front of the weary house had collapsed. Plaster from the high ceiling had crashed to the floor. From that strangling, poisonous cloud a young man stepped. His hair was uncut. He wore a faded shirt and a bib of overalls. Tears streamed down his face. "Charlie?" Jessie cried. The hands he stretched out to her were work-roughened. In one he held a cluster of fresh-picked ox-eye daisies. "Charlie," Jessie cried out again, her voice quieted. "Now I know not what we must do." Feet fleeted, she ran from the house. They trailed her, Alex and Charlie. She heard the tramp of their feet on the hard ground. Rushing along, she staggered once and regained her balance. Clutching the precious pale jar of Ellie's ashes, half crouching, she fought her way through the binding weeds, as if wading through water. Kneeling on Charlie's grave, she began to dig. Pebbles thrown up came down like hard, dry, stinging rain. All the time she could hear his sobbing, this dreadful weeping from which filled the living, waiting darkness of the night. She worked in horror lest he touch her. A sweat of dread streamed down her back. "God, give me strength," she prayed. God did. There came an urgent touch on her shoulder. Jessie did not pause to turn. She dared not look back, whose hand lay cold upon her shoulder. She knew. When the hole was deep enough, she smashed the jar against Charlie's gravestone with one shattering blow. Panting, she dribbled the ashes into the opening. Then she pressed down the loose earth, feeling the backs of her hands hot with her own tears. The lovers would lie together tonight, and every night throughout the eternity. When she looked round and up, she knew she would see only Alex standing there. "Charlie's gone," she said. "He won't come back. Ever." "I know," Alex said faintly. "I know." He helped her to her feet. They stood trembling in each other's arms. "Happy birthday, Charlie," Jessie murmured. "Happy birthday." And each pair of lovers sought the quietest spot ever, as lovers do. The Cruel Girl. Sometimes an event takes place that turns fate around. Such is the story of Imogene and the power of prayer. Imogene was the oldest child of a family of 4. It was a sad and sorrowful truth that Imogene grew up to be the cruelest child ever was. She was a cunning girl, which made her all the more fearsome, with a keen knack for ferreting out what could cause the most hurt. Pain and tears followed where she passed, and she passed laughing. Her little brother and sisters bore many a lifetime scar from wounds inflicted at her hands. Every day there was fresh swellings from her blows. The Holes, the neighbors, were a poor family whose papa was dying of an unexplained disease. Hunger was their relentless enemy. Lifting the lid of the Hole children's tin lunch pail, Imogene would slosh water on the few biscuits they had. No hurt was too small for her to overlook. She mocked every word of a first grader who stuttered until he quivered at the very sight of the schoolhouse door. Any child feared showing a liking for any living thing, as Imogene was sure to get hold of it and put an end to the creature in some unspeakable slow way. New helpless puppies were thrown headfirst into thorn bushes, kittens were sunk in the creek, revived, and sunk again. An unnatural child, the neighbors said she was, perverted, twisted. The devil dwelt in Imogene, they said. Certainly she was filled with evil. Her parents knew no peace. When a distant neighbor caught Imogene killing a young animal in the meadow, he dragged her home while she screamed and kicked and bit all the way. "I'm going to report her to the law," he said. "That child needs to be in an institution." Imogene even contrived various ways of setting her parents onto one another. The first thing they knew, they would be raving and quarreling with each other. Somehow the final and total blow fell when Imogene's papa came upon her slicing up live lizards with the sewing scissors. "We'll lock her up," he shouted. "We must keep her in a room by herself or send her away." He burst into tears. So Imogene was locked up alone in an upstairs room, and the preacher was sent for. How they prayed, Imogene's folks. There's no church house near. The family prayed wherever they happened to be, bringing in the cows, carrying up wood, mending fence. They walked with bent heads, praying. Evening the neighbors came to pray outside the child's door. They called upon the Lord as no hill people had called upon his services in a long, long time. How they stormed the Lord's castle with prayer. They called upon the Lord as no hill people had called upon his services in a long, long time. How they stormed the Lord's castle with prayer. They called unto the Lord to deliver Imogene from evil. Their prayers were answered. Hearing them one evening, Imogene smashed a window in a rage. Shouting obscenities and curses, raving, she clambered down the ash tree that grew next to the house. As the family and friends attempted to catch her, she leaped upon a young horse and sent the animal galloping madly through the woods. What happened then happened very fast. The girl was thrown head first from the racing animal. For days she lay as if asleep. The family and others prayed at her bedside. On the 15th day, Imogene's blue eyes fluttered open. The family waited with beating hearts as she gazed around the room. A gentle, beautiful smile broke over her face. "Papa," she whispered. "Mama." It was as if one girl fell asleep and another woke to take her place. Doctors counted her complete recovery as a near miracle, but folks in the hills knew the devil had been driven from Imogene's heart with the power of prayer. The Twisting Wind. Jeffrey was a boy kept out of sight by his mama almost from the beginning. At birth, she said, Jeffrey was as straight as any other baby. A near neighbor said the same. Then, before Jeffrey came to walking age, he was stricken with a rare malady, a drawing together of the bones and muscles which caused him to move on all fours. On the little hidden beaches where Jeffrey played in the damp sand, he left 4 tracks instead of 2. Claw-like marks where his curled, calloused hands dug in with their long, tough nails, and narrow points where his tiptoes pushed into the sand. He moved with his head pointing down, tilting forward, his nose almost touching the ground. This is how he came to be on intimate terms with ants. Pale people from the city, those raw stalkers of animals' flesh, chancing once upon one of these little beaches and seeing his tracks, reported an unknown species of animal afoot. When others came to look, they couldn't find the little beach again. If hunters in later seasons ever happened upon it, there were no tracks for them to see. Jeffrey was older and had become more cautious. Jeffrey was a part of the hills. He would never be spoken of on the outside. This much protection he had. Still there were those superstitious people who quailed at the very mention of his name. Later, Ada could understand why the ignorant and this timid might be frightened, coming on Jeffrey suddenly in the timber, with his long, streaming hair scampering on all fours. He could be mistaken for a weirdly assembled animal. Most folks thought Jeffrey couldn't talk. He could. Ada found that out. He never went to school, though. How could he? Besides, there was no need. He wasn't going to live very long, people said hopefully. Misshapen children never did. It was a mercy, they said. None of them ever learned how smart Jeffrey really was. He was a lot smarter than the folks who ran from him in fright. Ada met Jeffrey when she was 13 and he was 15. You wouldn't have known he was so young. When he raised his thin face up to the light, he looked so very old in the eyes and so full of pain. Ada and Jeffrey's friendship became possible because Ada couldn't see well. Later, when she grew older, she would go away to the city and have an operation and be fitted with glasses. But at the time Ada met Jeffrey in the timber, she lived in the only world she knew, one of blurred shadows and vague wonderments. Ada managed very well and was safe wandering along familiar paths. Then one day, going farther than intended, she blundered into the spot where Jeffrey spent his days and sometimes his nights. She might have drowned in the marsh, lonely as it was, and so isolated. Jeffrey heard her cries. He came to see what was happening, staying out of sight in the brush. "Somebody help me!" she was crying, almost without hope. "Please, somebody!" Then despairingly, "I can't see! I can't see!" Only then did Jeffrey go in after her. "I might have let you drown," he said afterwards in a musical, trilling voice. "But you didn't," said Ada, and they became friends. Ada learned to run for the first time by touching Jeffrey when he ran. She went with him many a mile through the beautiful hidden hills, her hand laid lightly upon his head for guidance. Folks around about considered it a marvel the way Ada learned to travel in the vast timbered area without getting lost. They didn't guess her guide was Jeffrey, and she never said, fearing that the slender thread of joy that ran through her friendship might be broken by those who couldn't understand. Ada admired the many splendid things Jeffrey could do. Moving so fast, he could catch a rabbit on the run or a low-flying bird in the bowl of his hands. He would, handling the little creature gently, touch it for a second against her cheek and his own, then release it to watch the joy of its running free or flying high. Big red and black wood ants remained by the hour in Jeffrey's patient palm. They moved as if dancing, seeming to look up into his face. Ada would touch them with a fingertip as they moved about rhythmically. Ants, Jeffrey told Ada, speaking in his old and sad way, were wiser than people. They had been on Earth so much longer. Jeffrey had a way of living with nature, of curling up, napping in a hollow stump. Fox do this, safe in sight, out of sight, catching the sun. That's how Jeffrey learned. He copied the ways of animals and birds, living off the land, eating berries here, wild fruit there. He took Ada about, showing her his cache of wild fruits, nuts, and berries, sun-dried and abundant for the cold days of winter. Edible roots and plants he had stored in grass-lined hollows and covered with earth. Living as Jeffrey did, his mama didn't have to put out cash to feed him. He had taken to staying away from home much of the time. A cozy bed of dry grass, soft fern, and mint tucked away back in a narrow, dry corridor of old bare cave served him well. He took Ada there once. She sensed the coziness of it. Ada found out about the twisting wind after Jeffrey's stepdaddy came. It was a remarkable, generous act. The stepdaddy told folks around the roadside store, his marrying Annabelle with her having the monster of a child that ran about like a dog on all fours. Spitting over his tobacco-stained whiskers, he proclaimed he would teach the boy to walk upright, or his name wasn't Duncan Weber. It was only a few weeks later that Geoffrey made one of his infrequent visits to the cabin to see his mama. Duncan came stumbling home in a drunken fit, and finding him there, struck him across his weak, soft back with a stick of stove wood. Sobbing and moaning, the boy dragged himself off into the woods. Ada found him in the old bear cave shivering. She poured icy spring water over his back to numb the pain. It was then that he told Ada he was going to give his stepdaddy to the twisting wind, that formidable force which swooped down in certain places and at certain times, carrying off with speed and silence anything that spot on the earth. This would be one good deed he could do to the world, he said, to remove Duncan Weber, a man of cruel, boastful ways. When Geoffrey was able to move around again, the lines of suffering bitten even more deeply into his young old face, he took Ada to a place where the twisted wind sat down. At his direction she plucked a flower and placed it on a log. Then they withdrew to a distance Geoffrey judged to be safe. In the next space of time, Ada was aware of a turbulence in the air. Her dim vision permitted her to make out only a blurred movement upward of all that lay free upon the forest floor. When the air was still again, they returned to where Ada had placed the flower upon the log. The flower was gone. So was the log. So were the leaves and twigs that lay around the log, all sucked up. Swifter than a clear eye could see, Geoffrey said. The twisting wind is so very kind, his voice sang low. It takes you off without pain or knowing, quicker than a man can whistle. Then one day Geoffrey did what he said he would with Duncan Weber. He lured Duncan to the spot where the twisting wind came down, telling him he had spotted a roost of wild turkey there. Duncan, a man whose thoughts were always on his stomach, followed eagerly. Geoffrey sat the greedy Duncan on a conveniently placed log. The twisting wind came. An instant later, Duncan was gone, along with the log and a few scattered leaves. The twisting wind never missed. Never. There was a lot of mysterious happenings Geoffrey knew about that others never dreamed of. Geoffrey knew the world around him, seen and unseen. Unseen not because it wasn't there, but because most people didn't take time to search it out, nor speak with ants. It was from ants, Geoffrey said, that he learned about the twist and wind, the kind and painless wind that came down touching spots upon the earth everywhere at given times, drawing everything up into it, people, animals, trees, house, anything, leaving not a trace, not a speck, or an echo of voice behind. He learned from ants how to tell by listening where the winds came down. Quicker than a man can whistle gone. Stepdaddy didn't feel a thing, he said in his shrill singing voice. Lots of folks go that way. If the others only knew, maybe it's better they don't. Then one day Geoffrey disappeared, as in her heart Ada knew he must. He'd gone away upon the twisting wind, perhaps at a time when the pain, the sorrow, too, of being different became more than he could bear. She knew because of the clean-swept ground and the familiar meeting place, and the message he left nearby. Not in words, but in flowers. Clasping the sweet-scented bundle, Ada hoped mightily he was in heaven. She hoped Geoffrey could walk straight up there, wherever the twisting wind took him. Only because he liked ants so much, maybe he wouldn't care to, if there were ants up there. Courtland Wethers in the Pit. For 50 years the pit had lain back there in the timber waiting, knowing he would come. The boy Courtland knew too. In the back recess of his mind he knew. When the pit called in the warm dark of some musical summer evening he would go. The pit hadn't come to Iron County of its own free will. Men searching for ore had dug it. When the ore petered out, the men had gone. Their legacy was the pit, dropping away into nothingness, its slimy sides impossible to climb. The pit, it was reckoned by folks who knew the hills well, reached down to an underground river which went raging through the many caverns that honeycombed the mountains. After a heavy rain, the waters sprang, sometimes roaring to the surface like some monstrous liberated beast. The pit was big enough to swallow up a team of mules with ease, a man with no trouble at all. From birth on, the pit caused uneasy speculation. Folks said, "No tellin' what evil may come creepin' crawlin' out of those dank, unexplored caverns." Families living closest to the gaping hole latched their doors by night. Tales of the pit's misdeeds passed from lip to ear and ear to lip, between bites and in guarded voices with hooded looks, at pie suppers, roofings, and winter's wood cuttings, wherever hill folks gathered. The pit was a forbidden place, visited only in disturbing dreams, in nightmares. A trap for the unwary, father told their children, a refuge for people tired of living. Daisy Lee, a young girl in trouble, vanished. "The pit," everyone cried, "has claimed another tender victim." "But she ran away to the city," Courtland dared to say. The neighbors took his speculations coldly. They knew what had happened to Daisy Lee. A yellow ribbon from her fair hair had been found dangling on a bush near the pit. A gangly, gawky youth had held high the golden soiled strip, grinning wolfishly and showing his long teeth. Old Mr. Evers had long suffered from an incurable ailment. His watch and wallet were found there. A thoughtful man, he saved his widow the price of a funeral. Certainly the pit had always had a taste for flesh. Two of the original diggers had disappeared almost at once, sucked down, swallowed, never to be seen again. On long nights at late hours there could be heard calling still. Courtland, in lonely, thoughtful hours, imagined the pit cluttered with bones. He puzzled where the people all went. Were they drawn down, surfacing in China? They would be so surprised, those Chinese people, seeing the ghastly, ghostly figures of old Mr. Evers and Daisy Lee and the others emerging from the soil. The pit was clever, cunning, and made itself more alluring by clothing its sides in lacy, swaying ferns and velvety moss. Trumpet flowers hurled flaming blossoms everywhere in brilliant splendor. Goldfinches streaked near, dazzling in the shadows. Scarce thumb-sized bluebirds sang sweetly by day, filling the air with music, and mockingbirds sang on moonlit nights. The pit was roofed with spreading oaks, those giants of the forest. A keen eye observed at once how they clung with gnarled, tough root fingers to the earth, aware of the deadly peril which lay beneath should they fall. Every strayed lamb, gone cow, or calf was credited to the pit's dark mouth. That place of beauty, sorrow, and despair, that place of awful, unseen happenings. What brought the boy Courtland Wethers within reach of the pit was the dying of his mauve lung fever. His pa Tansy had long since gone off to California, which was to Courtland's way of thinking the same as going to heaven. He had never heard tale of anyone returning from either place. The pit was on Adams' land. It was Bode Adams and his wife Maud allowed they would take Courtland in, good folks that they were, and needing a boy to work the mule they called Moses. It wasn't every boy so lucky, Courtland knew. Bode and Maud told him so often enough. They raised him up the same as the mule, with boot and whip. Both Moses and the boy carried scars to prove Bode was not a patient man, or a man who allowed sittin' unless he was the one doing the sittin'. Boy and mule worked sun up to sundown every day of the week except Sunday. Sundays they all went to the schoolhouse church, and including Moses. Bode and Maud rode grandly astraddle the mule, while Courtland trotted in the dust alongside. In church, Courtland heard more of the perils of the pit. The preacher spoke of the paw and claw marks to be seen there, torn deep in the steep sides. Some hapless creature scrambling for its life, Courtland figured. The preacher thought otherwise. He said so in ringing tones, banging his hard, pale fist, spraying them all with tobacco-stained spittle in the glow from his blazing, burning eyes. The pit was the devil's hallway from hell to Iron County. The devil crawled in, and the devil crawled out as he pleased, any time he chose. The devil burst out of that pit flaming in the dark of night, a sight to see, the scourge of Iron County. The devil spent his nights on earth cavorting with the wicked of Iron County, of which there were a plenty. He stared right at Courtland, saying this, the preacher did. Courtland shrank back against the hard bench. The preacher knew, who better, the mystery of the devil's devious ways. Courtland was convinced of that. He shook, trembled. His legs and his heart were held in icy chains. His teeth chattered, aching to the roots. He tried to think of all he was doing wrong. He prayed to do better, not that God should make it easy for him to shun sin, but at least make him strong in the face of it. He did have vain and wicked thoughts about the outside world. He longed achingly to explore the beauties and the uglies and the wonders there. He thought of girls sometimes. Was that sinful? He was a stranger still to soda pop, chewing gum, and radio music. Joy was something he could barely remember. He was a sinner, sure, and bowed his head. Time passed. The boy came of age, 15 years. On his birthday, Maud served him whole-boiled squirrel for the last time. The squirrel lay cold. Time passed. The boy came of age, 15 years. On his birthday, Maud served him whole-boiled squirrel for the very last time. The squirrel lay cold and grim upon the platter, staring blindly, for the eyes and teeth were still in the bald, bare head. The animal looked like some shrunken dead baby curled with the hands cut off. Courtland walked out, sickened at the sight. When you start something, there comes a time when it's too late to turn back. Courtland had reached that hour. He knew he would be leaving. The time had come to go. He stalked up the path to be with the mule one last time. Bode, with his hungry hunter's eyes, saw him there, pondering, maybe resting. He came on the run, whip in hand. Another time Courtland would have taken the lashing with a bowed back, the best he could. But the fresh memory of the whole boiled squirrel, curled, the eyes still staring, other beatings, the quivering flesh of the mule under the whip, all these seething set him off. Courtland threw himself upon Bode, tore the whip from his hands, and lashed out. Today Bode Adams would learn how the whip felt, that it felt like fire burning, like flames and red-hot coals searing. As the whip struck, Bode screamed. Blood squirted, soaking his shirt. The man threw frantic arms up to protect his face. Too late. Another cry and a red welt grew from his forehead to his chin, and Courtland wasn't finished. Not yet. Bode Adams must writhe, twist in agony, beg, crawl on hands and knees, bawl like a hammered calf. Courtland was quick, hard from work, accurate in where he aimed. He hit. Bode fell down on all fours, scrambling, bleating like some absurd beast trying to get away. But Courtland was on him, the whip hissing through the air like a flying, vengeful snake. Bode Adams would have been proud how well he had taught the boy, had he been able to open his swollen eyes to see. As it was, he wept and cursed words the preacher had never heard of or should. He who had never shown mercy begged for it now. Maud Adams came shrieking, hair flying. Her foul mouth was open wide, exposing rotten, stained teeth and drooling saliva. Courtland turned his back. He threw down the whip, satisfied. He had paid a debt long owed by him and Moses. He felt fine. He felt good. He felt tall, a man grown. He made for the patch. Moses must be freed too. He led the broken old mule past the pit into the deepest, darkest timber on the mountain. For the last time Courtland pressed his cheek to the mule's warm, moist hide, sorrowfully, for they were brothers in the heart. It was on his return down the mountain Courtland heard the call of the pit in the warm darkness of the summer evening, the call he had been waiting for, expecting. He heard the low cry repeated in sepulchral tones. "Courtland! Courtland!" The pit knew his name. He hesitated, stopped, listened. He hurried forward. Did it matter now that all caution had been thrown to the winds, all bridges burned? Wedging himself between two close-growing trees, the boy peered into the haunted waters, expecting he knew not what. The call from below came again, plaintive, tantalizing. Daisy Lee and old Mr. Evers were down there coaxing him to jump. He could see their silver eyes, feel the pull of their cool hands reaching, hear their voices calling, "Come, come, come." He slipped, regained his footing, and hearing a new sweet sound, turned his head. The spell was broken by the voice of the night and the nightbird singing, "Go, go, go away." Courtland freed, turned, and went off singing like a bird himself, making for the long, white highway to California. The weather there is said to be always fair, and the sun shines, even in December. So the story fades, like mist curling through the trees. Out here in the hollows, memories linger longer than footprints, and not every voice stays silent. Growing up in the deep south, I would hear stories of the haints and devils, of what to do if you find yourself at a crossroads at midnight. Ida's stories brought me back, to my youth, to my innocence, when the scariest thing was the unknown around me. Stories like this always make me think of the quiet nights, with my aunts and uncles watching lightning bugs flash. If the tale moved you, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts or your own stories, and so I think would have Ida. And if you'd like to keep wandering these forgotten paths with me, please like, subscribe, and tap that bell. Until we meet again, keep your heart steady and your light burning low.